Okay.
Excellent.
Hi everybody, let's start the meeting. Thanks for coming to the City and County of Honolulu Climate Change Commission meeting. We have a packed agenda, so we should get started. So first, if I can get help calling roll.
Chair Kaufman.
Here.
Vice Chair Fletcher.
Here.
Commissioner Aladado. Here. Commissioner Keener.
Here.
Commissioner Maynard.
Here.
All 5 commissioners are present. There's quorum.
Great, thank you. First on the agenda is approval of the March 19 minutes. We got this in our email this afternoon, so I don't know whether everybody's had a chance to review, but if you have, or can really quickly now, does anybody have any amendments?
Yes.
Not I.
So my one, I'm trying to find it now, but I had an amendment to, second to last page. Kaufman announced the commission has been in contact with the Hawaii Insurance Commissioner, Kaufman also noted hoping to get clarity from the commissioner on the initial intent of the state hurricane relief fund. I think we actually know what the initial intent was, right? It was to ensure bringing insurers back. So if we can just clarify that sentence to say, Kaufman also noted the initial intent of the state hurricane relief fund was to bring insurers back and not necessarily active insurance itself. And so if we can just sort of cross out some of the words in between.
I request a change as well. On the last page, page 6, the second bullet under questions and comments that followed, at the end, Keener noted the paper points to the example, take out artificially, the word artificially, and just say change it to shifting property values by creating.
Anything else? Can I get a motion to approve as amended? Motion to approve. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Alright, minutes approved. The next item is discussion action on the election of chair and vice chair of the commission. So when we first formed, we had discussed sort of the initial leadership, myself as chair and Dr. Fletcher as vice chair, but that we would revisit this on the fiscal year. So the first fiscal year came up just like a few months afterwards. So we continued to the following fiscal year, but we're up to the following fiscal year, and so I thought we should revisit this. Conversation?
I'm pleased with your leadership. I'm happy for it to continue.
I'll echo that.
I'll echo that.
Well, thank you all, that's very nice of you. I actually don't mind being chair, and we are getting some capacity in terms of AmeriCorps Vista this year, so, you know, in terms of staying while we do get some additional capacity, I would like that. So I'm happy to, but I also think that, all of us could do a great job in this role if somebody else wants to take it. Alright, so,
No climate change.
yeah. Okay, so then can I get a motion?
Like motion to nominate you as, renominate you as climate chair.
I guess so.
Okay, climate change commission chair. Okay. Yeah, I nominate.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Vice chair, I'm gonna say that Dr. Fletcher's been doing a great job and he should continue.
There's also plenty of room for someone else to come in as
Yeah.
vice chair. It's a fun job.
Hang out with me a lot.
No particular perks, but
to leave Dr. Fletcher as our vice chair.
Second the motion.
All in favor? Okay, so we're not changing leadership for one more fiscal year.
This is so incredibly embarrassing. I wonder, is there some other way to do this process? And this is done here, but next time, let's think about a different way to do this process.
What do you mean a different way? Like what?
I don't
kind of
know,
different
but-
way?
We're not allowed, we have to talk.
We can't talk, yeah, we can't talk amongst ourselves.
Right.
It's pretty transparent.
It's very transparent, yeah.
All right, so we'll visit this again next, for early June. Okay. Moving on to, Director Stambro, a report from the office.
Yeah, Director Stambro will be in shortly. He's coming from a meeting with a council member. If you'd like to move him down on the agenda a little bit, he'll be here shortly.
Okay, great. Then I'd like to call up, Dr. Paul Bernstein. He'll be presenting on the state's, recently released greenhouse gas emissions reports for 2015. Right there's good. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. So I'd like to just quickly report on the work that I and many others have done. Specifically, McKenna Kaufman from UH and Maya Sharp-Arm, as well as ICF. So ICF was responsible for coming up with historical emissions from which we developed our forecast. And why this is important, or why we did this work, Hawaii, as I think everybody knows, is committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions. So it'd be good to see what the forecasts look like. Are they achieving their goals? And specifically, if you look at Act 234, which calls for Hawaii to reduce its greenhouse gases to 1990 levels or below, want to see if we're on target. So first, starting from a historical perspective to get an idea of, I would say, kind of where we are, even though this is 2015, so our 2020 forecast, I guess, is actually probably closer to where we are. But anyways, breaking into three broad categories here. So in orange on the upper left there, well, sorry, let me start with energy industries in the blue on the right. On the bottom part are transportation, everything but non-military, and then other making up the rest there. So as you can see, the bulk of the emissions are coming from the energy industries, so that's electric utilities and the oil refineries, basically. And then transportation, so ground transportation, domestic air, marine transportation is that, and then other, I'll get to in the next one here. So here, don't want to belabor all, or go through all the various categories, but this just gives you an idea of the breakdown in terms of all the various categories that were looked at by ICF and UHERO. Just call your attention to the breakout in the two blue. It's breaking out what the last slide had in the larger blue in terms of energy industry. So you can see of the energy industries, electric utilities is the bulk of it. The oil refineries represent a small percentage. And then in terms of transportation, the bulk of it's the ground transportation, marine is fairly small, and then you have domestic aviation. But recognize that, well, a couple things. One, domestic aviation is not part of Act 234, but also a little bit harder for Hawaii to do much about, right? So, as opposed to ground transportation, which is covering light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles, commercial trucking, what have you, for the heavy-duty vehicles. Okay, so next few slides want to look at what we came up for the forecast, where we think the emissions are going to go. So the first slide here is looking at non-transportation sources and breaking it into two categories here, energy industries and basically all other non-transport. So non-transport being emissions coming from residences, from commercial, from other industries besides the oil refineries and utilities. Includes things like other greenhouse gases from substitution to, away from ozone depleting substances to different coolants or refrigerants. Also includes things for land use change, what have you. The point there as far as other non-transport is that it's basically growing with the state's gross state product. We're forecasting that those emissions, one, that there are not that many regulations attached to them, partly because they're small. And so the idea is that they'll probably just grow, as the economy grows, those emissions will basically grow, absent a little bit of improvement in energy efficiency. As far as the energy industries, we see a fairly rapid decline, actually. And this is brought about by the RPS and the energy and efficiency portfolio standards. So we're forecasting that well, I should say somewhat we're forecasting, but in a way really HECO and KIUC are forecasting that adhering to those policies will drive down emissions from the electric utilities. So our forecasts for the electric utilities are based on, for the HECO system is based on their PSIP, and then, sorry, in other words, their power supply improvement plan, and then KIUC's greenhouse gas reduction plan. So therefore, what we're assuming here, which we recognize there's uncertainty, especially now, is what's going to happen with the geothermal unit on the Big Island. Is it going to come back online, and if so, when? This forecast is assuming it is online, since when the PSIP came out, it's long before all the problems. And then also the PSIP was assuming a bit more optimistic deployment of renewables on the HECO system than what's being realized today. So this is, just backing up a bit, this is phase one. There's a phase two and a phase three. Likely what we'll see in phase two is it won't look quite as good in terms of the blue bars, that emissions will be slightly higher. The trajectory will be the same, it'll be downward sloping, but just not as dramatic. Okay, on the transport side, first looking at the aviation side, and this is domestic, non-military aviation. So in other words, flights that originate from Hawaii, either inter-island or going to the mainland, so domestic flights, is looking at those emissions. And basically you see that the emissions are rising somewhat over time. And there are basically two competing effects. One is there's a forecast that travel will continue with gross state product and tourism, what have you. But also the planes are getting more efficient. So that is helping contain, if you will, the rise in emissions. So without any energy efficiency improvement, the emissions increase would even be greater. Okay, so going to ground transportation here. So this is covering light duty vehicles, so there's basically personal transportation, your cars, what have you. And then heavy duty vehicles, which is essentially commercial trucking, the buses, what have you. And so we're forecasting, or at least this round, that the emissions would be fairly flat here. So again, you have a number of competing effects going on here. So what's causing emissions to not really decline, well, is the slow vehicle fleet turnover, the continual demand for travel. And against that is the corporate average fuel economy standards, which are calling for light duty vehicles to improve, new light duty vehicles to have improved efficiency over time. And though those targets are rather aggressive, as I mentioned, because the vehicles turn over rather slowly, it takes a while for the new vehicles to enter the fleet and therefore see any improvement in overall fleet efficiency. And you have a bit of the same issue going on with the heavy duty vehicles. There's also, the EPA also has standards to improve efficiency of heavy duty vehicles. But again, they're you know, the turnover is relatively slow. One other thing I didn't mention that's somewhat helping the emissions, at least with the heavy-duty vehicles, is a forecast that the percentage of biodiesel in the diesel pool increases somewhat over time, not dramatically, but somewhat, which also helps contain the rise in emissions due to the fossil fuels. Okay, so a few findings, a few takeaways here. Going back to Act 234, we find that Hawaii in 2020 would actually meet its goal, be about 500,000 metric tons CO2 equivalent below the 234 goal, in other words, 1990 emissions. In all of these, I'm just presenting a reference forecast. So there's a lot of uncertainty around this, which we're getting into in phase 2. So if oil prices were to change dramatically from the oil price forecast we're using, so if they were to be a lot higher, we'd expect emissions to be lower as people would respond to the prices. If oil prices are low, the emissions could be higher. Also assumptions about, I just mentioned the penetration of biodiesel into the diesel pool. If that were to be much greater, that would drive emissions down. In terms of where we see progress and where we don't see progress, again, the electric utilities, we see very good progress there, reducing its emissions. And really, we don't see great emission reductions throughout the rest of the economy. So, what to do about this, right? If we're going to make progress, many economists, more than 3,500, have signed basically an economist statement that appeared in the Wall Street Journal calling for putting a price on carbon emissions, which would essentially raise the price of all fossil fuels, inducing people or incentivizing people to reduce their consumption of fuels. Also part of this statement, though, was that, well, a couple things. One is that this carbon fee would rise over time, start low, rise over time, so it wouldn't just shock the economy. The other thing is that the fees, or the revenues that are generated from this carbon fee would be given back 100% to citizens. So this would eliminate the regressivity of just putting on a tax. So if you just simply put on a gasoline tax and take the revenue and put it into the general fund, it becomes very regressive. It's very hard for the poor to deal with that. However, if you give back that money all in equal shares to everybody, it becomes quite progressive, because the wealthy are putting in more money, but they're getting the same amount of money back as a poor person who's putting in less money. Thank you for answering.
Thank you, Dr. Bernstein. I'm sure there'll be questions, please, so you can
Okay,
stay.
sure.
Other questions?
I'm curious about, you say the money is being given back. How would that look like?
So, could basically go through various existing government programs, if that's what you're asking, the government mechanism. So, the IRS, the Department of Treasury, if people are getting food stamps or some kind of help there, could be given through those mechanisms. So the federal government basically has ways to reach almost all citizens, right? So it could be, so the hope would be to lower the administrative burden, right? Not create a whole nother agency in the government to distribute the revenues, could take advantage of the existing system.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question. What's the rationale that the wealthy are putting in the same amount for carbon fees as the poor do? What's the rationale of that based on?
So, the wealthy are actually, on average, putting in more. Because the carbon fee, it's not just, so the carbon fee that you're paying, there are basically two pieces to it. There's a direct piece, and I'll call it an indirect piece. So the direct piece is basically you're gonna see higher prices at the pump, right, for gasoline. So your direct consumption of fossil fuels, if you will, that's your direct.
And what's the assumption that the wealthy are paying more than the poor?
Well, let me just,
Okay.
sorry. So then the indirect is all the goods and services we buy. So if you buy a car, if you buy a refrigerator, what have you, there's energy that went into producing those goods. So the businesses are essentially gonna have to pay a fee when they produce these goods, because they're gonna be using energy, right? So at the plant that's making the automobiles, they're consuming energy, and they're gonna have to pay more for that energy, right? So those producers are gonna pass down some of that fee, right? So the wealthy are buying far more goods and services, basically by definition, right? Because they have more wealth than the poor are. So that's where the wealthy are putting in more into the pie. They likely will be putting in more also in driving their car more, in heating their home more, or air conditioning their home more, what have you.
Is that a generalization for the nation or specific to Hawaii? Because in my estimation, like rural, like people on Oahu are not as economically, well off as those who live closer to the center. And so
Right.
as far as the direct costs, they actually pay more in gas than the wealthy.
So I agree with you that in terms of the direct cost when it comes to gasoline consumption, if you look out at people in Waianae versus
Yeah.
people in Manoa or something, right, coming to work in downtown, fair enough in terms of gasoline consumption, right? But remember, the gasoline consumption is only a part of the piece, right? So presumably the homes, right, you know, somebody's got the huge mansion in Manoa or what have you, right, costing more for electricity than somebody who has a smaller house out in
It's
Waianae.
hotter in Waianae.
Fair, yeah, right, so may not, right, and this person could have solar, right?
Right,
In,
right.
in their form,
Right.
so, I mean, again, these are averages. But I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but that's why I'm saying that indirect piece is a half to even more of essentially what people are paying in carbon fees. So, as I said, basically by definition, the wealthy are paying more, right? They can buy more cars, they
And there's
can buy more
projections
appliances.
as to that, as far as they're specific to Oahu, that is the case.
Well, it's not even a projection, right? Just take the data. If we were to look
Yeah,
at the
that's what I'm
data.
asking. So there's clear data to support.
Right,
that
so if we were to
analysis.
look at the data, if we were to take household data and look at, you know, take, break it up in quintiles, let's say, and you look at the lowest quintile compared to the highest quintile, you'd see those purchasing patterns. So I think there's something that often gets confused here, right? If you look at the purchasing patterns and we look in percentage terms, no question, the poor are paying a greater percentage of their money for energy,
Mhm.
right? I mean, than the wealthy are, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of the amount of money that they're paying for whether it's energy or all their goods and services, again, by definition is less because they have less money
Yeah.
than the well-to-do. So,
I think that kind of information would be good to, include in these kinds of analyses.
okay. Okay. Can't remember that.
Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering, I know you noted a lot of the uncertainties in the future projections, but I was wondering what you saw as the greatest uncertainty in achieving those future projections, and if you have a note of maybe the things that we at the city or state level may actually have control over those uncertainties.
I think oil price is a big one, given the dependence of the state on oil. So, and given the volatility in oil, which also goes back to why if you place a carbon fee on it, it help drive things. I guess other things in terms of I guess other things would look at what the penetration of various technologies are. And so if you think of that by sector, whether that's renewable fuels in transportation or penetration of electric vehicles. I think the electric sector is pretty well at hand. I mean, we have the RPS standard, we have the other regulations for that. Yeah, I guess, like I said, I guess the oil price and the penetration technology. But the problem with it, I guess the issue with the penetration technology, right, is that Hawaii doesn't, to your point, right, Hawaii doesn't have much influence on that. Hawaii can indirectly affect the price of oil though, right, by putting a price, I mean, could raise the barrel tax, right, and put a tax on coal, and put taxes on natural gas, right? So could do something there, could directly affect the price of energy, but Hawaii has a harder time. I mean, Hawaii can pass energy efficiency standards and all that, in fact, I think, right, there's something on the agenda, and I think that's all well and good. But it's not like California that can really affect the auto manufacturers to produce more electric vehicles.
Are there examples of where a carbon tax has been passed and been in play for a year or two?
So there, it's been in play for a while in British Columbia. It's been in play in Sweden. No, I'm just drawing a blank on the third place.
And the outcome?
The outcome, I mean, the conventional economic analysis holds that you put a price and you get a reduction. You get a reduction in emissions or reduction in the demand for fossil fuels.
So it has the desired effect?
It has the desired effect. People can, I'm sure, argue about is it more or less effective than predicted. In Sweden, it's a bit hard because it's a very narrow. It's a very high tax, but it's also very narrow.
In what way? What do you mean?
It's only covering a limited number of sectors. The way to do it would have it be an economy-wide, very broad-based fee, so that all fossil fuels are covered, or as best as possible, the emissions from the combustion of all fossil fuels.
In these locations where it was implemented, were they implemented alone or with any other kinds of legislation? I also thought they tried to implement something like this in France, and that resulted in the Yellow Jacket kind of protests.
Right, and that's
But I know that was
exactly.
with other changes were also tried to implement, so I don't know if you can disaggregate the effects of that, but.
Right, so just going to the yellow vest, I think that's an excellent point. And that's exactly why, going back to the economist statement, that they're calling for all the revenues to be recycled back to citizens. Because otherwise you get exactly the problem that they had in France. It became a very regressive tax. They just put a tax on gasoline or put a tax on energy use, and that money just stayed with the government. So therefore, you know, the least well-to-do could least afford seeing those price increases. There was nothing to offset it. Versus if you give the money back, you know, in equal shares, so actually the less well-to-do are getting actually more money back, then they can handle the escalation in the fuel prices. So I think it would have probably a similar effect here if you were just to, whether it be Hawaii or throughout the US, if you were just to simply tax the fossil fuels and the money just sat with the government, it didn't go directly back to people, I think you'd get the same type of revolt. You see that somewhat in California, how they passed a gas tax and then of 12 cents a gallon, and then 2 years later, there was a proposition to undo that gas tax. So, you know, California being probably one of the most progressive as far as dealing with.
So in British Columbia and in Sweden, it wasn't a regressive, the money was returned to the citizens?
Yeah, that's a good question, I'm not sure. I don't know.
In British Columbia, it's a dividend. I don't know
Okay.
about Sweden, but in British Columbia, it's definitely a dividend. I don't think, I'm not sure if they do it through their existing tax system or they actually cut individual checks. I don't know.
Are there any examples that either of you know of where an attempt to build in a more just social system, a more sociologically just element into it, so that you would recognize the excess burden on those who are least able to pay for it?
Are you,
Rather than just a flat carbon tax and it all goes back to you, is there anything in addition to that?
are you asking sort of along the lines of the Green New Deal, or?
Well, that's so broad, no.
Oh, okay.
I'm just referring in terms of a carbon tax. I'm interested in sort of all the versions of a carbon tax that we know have actually been implemented and what the outcomes were.
Well, I guess, okay, so maybe I'm, thinking too much just as an economist or what have you, but I think the economics would say the best way to help people is just give them the money, right? And then they can make the decisions with, you know, whatever they feel is in their best interest. And by giving it back, so if you think that, I mean, if you and I are participating, the only two people in the carbon tax, right? And, you have much more money than I do or what have you, and so I only put $10 in the pot and you put $90 into the pot. Well, then we take that pot and we distribute it evenly though, right? I get $50 and you only get $50. So I actually get additional money.
Right,
So
I
I'm
understand.
being,
Yeah.
so I mean, I guess I see that as a way that is helping, you know, with this, you know, issues of income inequality, helping the least, you know, or the most disadvantaged people in the community. I mean, back to your point, right? I mean, there are people in rural areas that are driving very far and may have, who knows, you know, it's not gonna be perfect. But I think by and large, it's, you know, one of the best ways to help with some of these inequalities.
And you don't recall whether BC, the version of a carbon tax in British Columbia,
I think that's what they do.
was just flat return to everybody split?
I think so.
Okay.
No?
No.
Do you recall the third example? So you had Sweden, British Columbia.
I can get back to you. I know there's a third one. Hang on.
Okay.
Initially, BC gave the money out to businesses and residents, but over time, the refunds increased to business at the expense of residents.
Any more questions for Al Bolton?
Okay, I think we do have some questions from the public as well. I had seen a hand here and then we'll go there.
Yeah, I just think it's, you mentioned the word residents, whereas you focused on citizens, so I think it's important that, you know, because the residents will be paying this tax too, so I assume they'll be getting a return as well. People who are not US citizens.
No,
Just citizens?
just citizens, tax-paying citizens.
Well, there are tax-paying residents too.
Right, but
And
I
it's a
guess
big
hate to get too, I guess let me just say that the idea behind the policy is sort of to what you're saying, right? The money goes back to people. So you could imagine a version that says it goes back to households. Maybe it goes back to citizens, maybe it goes back to residents. And you're right, it matters depending if you're not in all three of those buckets. You start to care, or how it gets divided up, right? But I think, as I said, I think the issue is to look, I guess I look at it, at least for now, until something comes about, to be more broad, that does it go, so the dividends could do a lot of different things, right? They could sit in the government coffers and just go to all sorts of programs. They could go back, as Henry's saying, they could go back to businesses, right? They could reduce corporate income taxes, or they could go back to people, or they could go for R&D in renewable technologies, right? Or, you know, any type of thing. I think what they're signing on to there, the economists are, it goes back to the people. And in their language, I think it does actually say citizens as opposed to residents, but.
That's that.
Yes.
Thanks. Two questions.
Well, actually, I should have both of you introduce yourself for the record. Sorry.
Hi, Bob Franco from Kapi'olani Community College.
Thanks, Nialto. These are actually questions I think more for the Commission than for Dr. Bernstein, but one of them concerns the carbon footprint of our tourism industry, particularly of flying here. I can't find any reliable numbers, but I've done a back of the envelope calculation, and I think just flying tourists here and back is equivalent to half of the carbon footprint that Dr. Bernstein was talking about. It's more than 10 million tons equivalent of CO2 a year by my calculation. And our entire economy depends on flying tourists here. And so when we talk about carbon neutrality, I wonder if we don't think that we have a responsibility to account for that footprint even though I understand that by law, by federal law, we're not allowed to impose any kind of a fee or a tax on people flying. So, as I understand it, that's why we're leaving it to one side. It's not something we can affect by policy here in Hawaii, but we can say that we want to mitigate our carbon footprint, and we're gonna take that into account, even if the feds won't let us account for it. That's one. And the other is the embedded carbon in products that we import from all around the world. This is something that Henry goes on about quite a lot, but quite rightly so. If we're gonna talk about carbon neutrality, shouldn't we be assessing the carbon footprint of the stuff that we import?
So I'll take that. So, I think in terms of a broad policy discussion, all of these things should be within that, right? So for me, so I think the work that Paul presented, right, this is the inventory side of it, not necessarily the policy side of it. Although it gives you, the projections tell you where the policies are working and where there's not any policies, right? Where they're not quite working to move the needle. So I think for us as a city commission, the question is, where do we have, and I was Courtney for this, where do we have sort of jurisdiction and authority to direct policy, to make recommendations? And it probably is most in the ground transportation sector, I would say, for this, but that doesn't mean there's not multiple layers of jurisdictions that we shouldn't be sort of addressing and having conversations about.
Presumably, we could propose to the legislature that they impose a carbon fee on every tourist. Not at the airport, but at the time of checking in at the hotel or at Airbnb or somewhere like that. We can recoup that money and use it to mitigate our carbon footprint if we wanted to. There's nothing to stop us doing it. And given that those two things between them are probably equivalent to, or perhaps even more than the carbon footprint that we've just been talking about, it's not as if it's an insignificant amount.
I think the interstate commerce law is an issue on that specific example, but,
On the flying end of it, but once they check
No.
into a hotel.
yeah, it would have to be attached to a service, like the
Yeah,
TNT.
taken up by the service.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's, you're saying we have an internet service, which is why the transportation would be a place to do it for tourists, potentially.
Sorry, what?
Ground transportation in terms of like vehicles, et cetera, you could attach it there.
Right. Yes, but one important thing to note, right, is that, this word tax or fee is often used interchangeably, but what's most important to reduce fossil fuel usage by volume, is to apply it by volume, right? So having a flat fee wouldn't have the same effect. It might have an effect, but a different kind of effect. Other thoughts?
So what's the status? There was a bill that passed calling for a carbon tax study in the most recent legislature. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do we know,
It's
Jody, do you
passed.
know the status of that? Where is it now? What are
Yeah.
the next things?
It was given an appropriation of $150,000 given to DBED. So of course the bill has to be passed and then DBED has to prioritize releasing those funds and then put out the RFP and all the things to get it done.
Is there any
and-
definition? Go ahead, Henry.
Henry Curtis, one of the changes is every form of the bill up to conference committee said that multiple parties would be part of the process and there would be a general broad discussion. The conference committee stripped out all public participation.
Was stripped out the vast majority. It's just like 2 sentences now,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't specify who will do this study, what entity will do the study, it's just DBED will issue an RFP. And is there timing on that? How
Well, it has
long?
to be signed first.
Right, no, but when is the report due?
Doesn't say. I don't think.
It doesn't
Not
say.
specific, but the budget is it's a 2-year budget.
2-year budget, okay.
That actually requires report in 2 phases, and the first report has to come in before the end of the year, before the next session.
That was the old version. I think that was stripped.
That was stripped.
I
Yes.
think so, yeah. Okay, in the interest of time, because we have a packed agenda, I'm gonna, ask you to stay here. We could call our Rocky. Oh,
Do you wanna go?
Josh.
No, I mean.
so we skipped your part on the agenda,
Alright.
in terms of an update.
I'm happy to go, I'm flexible.
Alright, we can, put you sort of towards the end to wrap up the greenhouse gas part.
Yeah, I will have to step out at 4:45, but.
You're not flexible, good. Why don't we just get a quick update from Josh?
Okay. Okay.
Director Sandberg. You can stay, Rocky.
I'll hang out.
So I guess I was flexible up until a certain point. Josh Stanborough, Chief Resilience Officer for the city, for the record. Aloha Chairman Kaufman and members of the commission. Wanted to offer a brief update on the activities of the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency. Just to start off, I think Boulder, Colorado is another jurisdiction that has done a form of a carbon tax. It's actually levied on carbon-based fuels that are burnt for their grid. And then they use the proceeds from that, from the natural gas and the coal and all that's burnt from the grid, to fund their climate adaptation and preparation efforts in the city. So that's a third opportunity to look into. The office has continued to add capacity. I think since the last time that the commission has met, the position that was funded under our partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies, Nicola Hedge joined us from the San Diego Community Foundation. She's going to be working on a portfolio of projects around transformation in the transportation sector, so a lower carbon footprint. And we also added Chris Cunningham, who has deep experience in FEMA work and state hazard mitigation work. He comes to us from Nashville, Tennessee, but he'll be in charge of creating a hazard mitigation program for the city and then a long-term recovery plan for the city based on potential natural disasters that could come our way. We've also moved offices. For anyone that's looking for us, I just want to let everybody know, don't go to FMB 9th floor any longer. We're no longer there. They're going to be doing a remodel on that floor. So we are out at Kapalama Hale and in the second floor there for 6 months. I'll just say 6 months and keep it hopeful that it is 6 months and that we'll be back, but our offices have moved. We're also happy to announce that we've been successful in providing securing VISTA support for the Climate Change Commission. That means that there will be a year-to-year sort of a position that is going to be able to assist and support the commission in doing research around the initiatives that you choose to carry out. It will be managed by the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency, but the position will actually be housed at UH to allow for all of the 80% of expertise that's on the commission is based out of UH, and so we thought it would be helpful for them to be housed there and be close to the vast majority of the commissioners to help assist your work. The other thing that we wanted to update you on is the progress on codes. When the office was first created, we did sort of a scan of the field, and codes was the most important sort of scalable, fundamental, foundational policy change that could help both on the mitigation side for climate adaptation, and on the adaptation side for building codes and bigger storms and whatnot. So the electrical codes have already gone to council. They've been through 2 hearings, and that helps sort of standardize the battery storage and PV and all the things that have sort of evolved over the past many years that we haven't updated our codes. Energy codes will be next and heard in June, and there are important elements of that energy code that will really help on the climate mitigation side if adopted around readiness for electric vehicles and making sure that the lowest cost and the least carbon pollution option is available to residents of the city as that parity is reached around EVs and fossil fuel cars, which is predicted to be around 2023 now by the industry. And then also making sure and ensuring that there's the least cost for residents living in homes and paying long-term bills around utilities and water heating and others, and tapping, making sure that we're tapping solar power for that where it's feasible. Happy to announce that the resilience strategy, which has been
we've been working on for over a year now with many of the folks in this room as informants and folks from outside of the city, will be released on Thursday. We welcome you to watch our website. It will be posted on Thursday and be available for everyone to see there. And then I think you have in front of you a copy of the annual sustainability report, which came out of our office last month. This is something that is mandated by charter that the office needs to put out on a regular basis. We've taken an approach to make sure that there are actual metrics in there that we will look at year over year and have a very candid look at whether we're making progress on what we think are key metrics in pushing us towards addressing the climate crisis and making us more resilient and sustainable in the future. Welcome your feedback on that. This is a work in progress. If you think there's metrics that should be included that weren't there, or ways that we can measure it better, if there's better metric to measure that particular element, we'd be open to that feedback. Another initiative that the office has been working on recently, and some of you were able to participate in it, many in the room, was our partnership with USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. We were able to bring out specialists around communication, around climate change and sustainability issues, Michael Schenk, and his partner at USDN. And then we brought out Kristen Baja to talk about equity in climate change and making sure that there is a just transition, as you guys have been talking about right here with sort of the carbon tax and the dividend element. Those trainings were really well attended, and those trainings were also provided in partnership with the other 3 counties on every single island. So we've been really trying to work in close collaboration with our colleagues and throughout all 4 counties so that we're all on the same page as we move forward addressing the climate crisis. And then finally, it's not a surprise, I think, that in the presentation that we just saw, that there's progress on the grid where there isn't progress in other areas. We do have an actual law and a regulation at state level with the RPS standards, and in part that's why you actually see progress there, whereas in the areas of transportation and other areas there, we do have goals, but we don't actually have law with the force of law, regulations, mandates, that sort of thing, and that's obviously something that we are hoping to expand to those other areas where we're seeing this, not seeing a drop in emissions, whether it's transportation, whether it's on the utility side, and what heating and home with codes and those sort of things. And so that's part of what the office has been doing, is trying to fill the gap in those other areas to make sure that we are reducing our carbon emissions in line with our commitments to the Paris Climate Agreement and others. So that's my summary.
Great, thank you. Other questions for Mr. Stanton?
We can get back to the reports.
And we appreciate the capacity for this stuff.
Yes, we are really excited that we're going to be able to, we know you guys have a very ambitious agenda, and we have a lot of questions, and I hope that it provides a lot of support you guys need to do your work.
I wanted to call out Haley and Justin for working super hard on providing us with a vista. Many weeks, hard work. We really appreciate it. You guys did a great job. Thank you very much.
I'll just add that the other, the whole reason for Vista program in AmeriCorps is really to, for folks who are coming, in a lot of cases, coming out of their education and getting that first sort of, opportunity to work on the issues that they're passionate about, often winds up being a career pipeline for them. And so we really believe that part of the reason that's really important for this particular position is to make sure that there's a pipeline for youth who are interested in these issues to get exposure and experience, and hopefully wind up in the public service. So thank you for that.
Sherilyn, is it possible to put that door jam there? That door's open. Just stick it out.
Thanks.
Sideways.
No, just side.
Good afternoon, Rocky Mold, Energy Program Manager for the Resilience Office. Thanks for taking the time to hear us out here. I'm going to present on the, sorry about my voice, I'm under the weather a little bit, so I sound a little gravelly. I'm going to present on our city's first ever greenhouse gas inventory, as well as the energy code update that Josh talked a little bit about. first I'll get to the greenhouse gas inventory. And you guys have seen this slide before, I'm sure, but this just tells you that our office was created in charter. We have a mandate from Oahu's voters, and that mandate includes, reducing climate emissions, greening operations, ensuring sustainable policies. The creation of a greenhouse gas inventory is right in line with that mandate. Essentially, we have a mandate to create a climate action plan. That's part of the Paris Climate Agreement that we committed to back in 2017. The mayor committed to in 2017. Essentially, a climate action plan consists of really three things, but a fourth. The first is a greenhouse gas inventory. So really, you have to take a snapshot of where you are to measure what your emissions and your carbon footprint is in order to do anything about it. Then you go and you establish reduction targets and mitigation strategies through forecasting. A lot of what Dr. Bernstein was showing you was some of the work that we're going to be doing going forward in terms of forecasting the various pathways to our goals. And of course, community and stakeholder engagement throughout the process, through all three of those phases is really key. So in terms of climate action planning, step one is the greenhouse gas inventory. I'd like to give a shout out to Joshua Ferrer Lozano, who is my Vista analyst, brought up by Vista, working with me on the greenhouse gas inventory. He's here today. So essentially, we're at this step one, but really we've also started implementing. I mean, we finished our greenhouse gas inventory. We're about to go into target setting. But in the meantime, as Josh has alluded to, we're doing other things. We're already moving forward. We have a benchmarking plan that we're putting in place. We're changing codes over. We're looking into doing energy performance contracts, these kinds of things. Those will be wrapped in, and the impacts of that will be measured on a carbon basis through the climate action plan. But again, in order to understand what those impacts are, to be able to identify those strategies and put carbon numbers, we need the inventory first. The creation of our inventory was very much a collaboration with a variety of different partners. We relied on a lot of the work that the state did with their greenhouse gas inventory back in 2009, and then their update in January of this year. So the state's really, it's DOH, DBED, UHERO, Office of Environmental Quality Control, Sustainability Office, and others. But also, we had a collaboration with the counties. And so all the counties got together and we worked on implementing the same processes and protocols for developing our greenhouse gas inventory. And that was really through, we all became part of ICLEI, which is a consortium of municipalities for sustainability globally. And so we were really, through that membership, we actually got expertise and consulting from ICLEI and how to employ greenhouse gas inventory protocols. And then AECOM was our resilience strategy partner. We developed a greenhouse gas climate action planning game, a simulation game, which we played at public outings, public meetings throughout the island. AECOM really helped us with that, and in the process, we actually got a lot of consultation on our greenhouse gas inventory and practices. So what are we doing? We're doing a community scale greenhouse gas inventory. It's a little different than the state's protocol, and I think it's important to note this. We're employing a protocol for cities specifically. And so some of the breakdowns in terms of the sectors are a little bit different. But it's really something that, again, through ICLEI and through the World Resources Institute and C40 cities, that's been proven out as a city standard. So we're trying to level set all of our policies so that we can compare ourselves to other cities as well. In the middle there, you'll see that the global protocol for community scale greenhouse gas emissions inventories. Basically, you have a choice of doing either a community scale inventory, which covers your jurisdiction, or you can do a government operations inventory, which covers just your actions and what you're doing. We went for the community scale because we're looking at not just policies that we do ourselves, but also policies that will affect our carbon footprint beyond just our own operations. One of the first things you have to choose and figure out is this idea of scope and what the scope of your inventory is. And there's scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is stuff that, emissions that occur from activities that occur within your jurisdiction. Scope 2 is energy use that might be produced outside of your jurisdiction, but you're using it within. And scope 3 are indirect emissions from activities that occur outside of your jurisdiction. So for Oahu, if you think about it, we're an island. And because we're an island, actually, our scope 1 and 2 are combined together, really. And then we have this out-of-boundary transportation, air transportation. So really, what we did was a scope 1 and 2 and a partial scope 3 inventory. So what did we do? So the process that we went through, and this is really just to show that it's really an iterative process where you identify data sources that give you an idea of what your fuel consumption and your activity is within your boundaries. You scale that data, so we don't have perfect information, right? We have actually national and state level databases that we use, and we find these really credible sources. We're trying to find data sources that are credible, that are going to last for a long period of time, so that we can update and then go back historically, so that we can update our inventory on an ongoing basis, and also something that comes from publicly available. So we don't want to take privately sourced information. The information that we want is going to come from public sources that anyone can get. But then what you do is you have to scale that data down to your jurisdiction. So a common scaling factor is population. So what we use as our main scaling factor was our population, our de facto population relative to the state's de facto population. We found really good data sources from the U.S. Energy Information Agency and DBED and other sources, and that was state level data. We then took that data and we scaled it down to our population. And we chose de facto because that also includes tourism and residents combined. And then what you do is you apply, with that activity data, you apply emissions factors. So for each fuel use, for each activity and each fuel use of type of fuel, you have to apply how much carbon that produces per unit of generation or per unit of activity. And that actually comes from, that's in the protocols, that's baked into these inventory tools that we use, provided from ICLEI and provided from the World Resources Institute and the World Bank. We use actually two tools. You see in there, ClearPath and Curb. We kind of like each of the tools for different reasons, so we decided to use both and kind of calibrate between those two, what we eventually chose. And then you kind of have to go back, and what you're looking for is a complete set of data that covers your entire jurisdiction, that is mutually exclusive, that is comprehensively exhaustive. It doesn't have double counting. And it's a very painstaking process of working with collaborators and stakeholders to make sure that you're covering everything but not double counting. So that's what that. So here's a look at this is our 2016 inventory. And you'll notice there's similarities between what the state inventory is. But in general, on-road transportation comes out at about 21%. Air transportation we have is at 13%. It's important to note that air transportation is domestic only, and so the way we scaled that is we had a factor for how many flights were domestic flights going into H&L airport, and with that as a proxy, we took overall fuel use in that category to come to that. We understand that international travel is a big portion of the travel that's coming here in air, but this is the protocol that cities are using around the country.
One way only.
And okay, so
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Are there any other cities that have any kind of equivalent high tourist volume that, there's no way to tweak this model to kind of consider more factors in this? This is all baked in?
it would maybe a place like you know, Miami, you know,
Or
or
New
something
York,
like that.
or Singapore,
Yeah.
or any other place that has high international travel,
Yeah,
as a travel hub. I really
Potentially,
think-
yeah, we'll take a look at that. I
Yeah.
mean, we were looking for, this is again, this is
I
a
guess
protocol, it's
yeah,
used.
for sure. I guess what I'm saying is, it's like reiterating to me the fact that this is not necessarily a unique Hawaii problem. I think
Yeah.
a lot of times we're like, oh, that's just unique to Hawaii, but actually I think it's not. So I think it's a good, something to reiterate
Yeah.
for next version.
So, you know, so the idea is somewhere that international travel, I mean, right now, it's not, the international air is not being accounted for
Yeah, that
in
seems
city
problematic.
inventories. So maybe a national inventory is taking into account international travel. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. So, that's a big area for future exploration. And then for Hawaii, it's super important, right? It's a huge part of our economy is tourism and travel, airlift.
About military?
So military pops up in here in a variety of different places. It's in the ground transportation, but it's not fuel that's bought on base and used for strategic purposes. It would be fuel that's used by like military members, you know, out driving around in society. So we don't include kind of the strategic reserve of fuel in this inventory. It's just what they would use on a day-to-day basis, living their lives here and doing their operations.
Off base. You
Yeah,
don't count
off
gas
base.
stations on base.
Correct. Yep. I believe that's the case. So, here's 2005. We did a 2005, a 2015, and a 2016. Originally, we did 2015, but we actually, again, we developed this process so that we could quickly update it when the data became available. So we just decided to go to 2016 when we could. But this is 2005. We're using 2005 as our baseline because the Paris Agreement uses 2005 as their baseline. And as you may know, the goal for the U.S. based on the Paris Agreement is 26 to 28% by 2025. By 2025 under 2005 levels. So here's just another way to look at our inventory. This is by sector, and it shows, you know, each year in a bar by sector going down, and you can see, you know, the relative, level of transportation is a big part of our inventory. Commercial and industrial energy, another big area. One big difference between our inventory and the state's inventory is that the grid electricity goes all into energy industries in the state's inventory. Per our protocol, all of that grid electricity goes into is attributed to each sector. So you'll see a difference there. Again, this looks at the percentage change from 2005 to 2016. And you'll notice we're down 17% overall, but as a theme, our ground transportation hasn't come down at all in this period. It's down very little. So a theme of this is, ground transportation looks like an area where we're going to have to do a lot of work. Again, breaking it down between transportation and building emissions, these are kind of, you have your agriculture, forestry, and other land use. You have your waste and wastewater. You have those. We actually built our inventory from the state's inventory because we didn't have good data to use for ourselves. So we took what the state did with theirs and extrapolated that information for those sectors. And really, where we can make a lot of difference and where the rubber meets the road is in building emissions and transportation emissions. So this just shows you a breakdown within those categories. And you'll notice again, there's been significant progress in pretty much everything except for on-road transportation. Again, here's on-road emissions. And this chart on the right, it shows fuel use for ground transportation and electricity generation. That's a chart I borrowed from Elemental Accelerator and the Rhodium Group. But it just shows that we're making significant progress on in our electricity system, but not in our ground transportation system. And just by the way, if you look at Oahu's carbon intensity relative to the rest of the country, we are number 2 in terms of high carbon emission intensity, and significantly above the U.S. average.
Is that per capita?
That is per unit of electricity generated. So per megawatt hour of electricity that we generate, our electricity system is a very high carbon intensity. So even though we're making significant progress on the grid, I think we still have a ways to go. And I think this is, you know, a lot of that's from our coal and our low sulfur fuel oil, input. I mentioned our CAP simulation. This is what we developed this game that we went around. This is one of the uses for the inventory. So we actually did this based on a preliminary version of our inventory. So some of the numbers were different, but you know, we're taking this inventory and we're using it in various ways to identify strategies and to engage with the community. We actually were able to get a lot of good input from the community on what renewable energy or transportation measures they saw as important to achieve, you know, the state and the city's climate goals. Our inventory was in our sustainability report that you guys all have there. And now, should I go to the electric codes, the energy codes, or you guys want to ask questions about the inventory?
People might have questions about
Yeah.
the inventory, so why don't we, are there any questions about the inventory? Are those questions from the public? We'll get there. Okay, Henry?
Henry Curtis. The state numbers, excuse me, the state numbers went from 14.4 to 13.9, or a 3.3% drop over 30 years. Your numbers from 2005 to 2016 are a 17% drop over 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
How are you achieving such dramatic droppage at the majority of the state when the state has such a puny number?
So because the carbon intensity in 1990 was significantly lower of our economy, right? So from 1990 to 2007, it was like a huge boom, and like emissions skyrocketed significantly based on that boom. We had like peak oil and all these things that were occurring. So the 2005 baseline is significantly different than the 1990 baseline. That's really the main reason for the difference. Also, I think, you know, in that 13.3 and 13, I think that was affected facilities, because Act 234 really was only looking at certain facilities, and so it was an adjusted number down. The real inventory is like at 20 million metric tons or so, or thereabouts, I believe.
Yeah, the total number is 20 something.
When you say affected facilities, can you specify what types of facilities? Are they more government facilities?
So
or?
in Act 234,
Yeah.
Affected facilities are those that DOH, the Department of Health, and their Clean Air Branch chose within the electricity generating sector as large emitting facilities that needed to comply with Act 234 law.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the rules, right?
Yes, the rules, that's the rules, yeah. Yep.
Jody Malinowski, Sierra Club. I'm interested in knowing if the city or the commission has commented on particularly the AES Hawaii plant and their proposal to DOH in compliance with Act 234 and actually partnering with the other facilities to meet the greenhouse reduction plan, the goals necessary to meet that. Have you guys commented or weighed in on that?
We have not weighed in on that. I will say we joined, we signed a declaration for no coal. What was it, by 2025? No coal by 2025 was what we signed on to, the no coal declaration.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it was 20.
Yeah, but we haven't like solidified that in any way. You know, we look at, you know, the power supply improvement plan from HECO, and we look at HECO saying that they're not going to re-up the power purchase agreement with AES for coal, but we don't have a position on that yet, other than, you know, we have very significant climate goals and greenhouse gas goals, and you know, obviously AES over time is going to need to become 100% renewable.
I do have a question. You identified the building sector as one of those areas with the most room for improvement. Was that purely on the operational side, or have you looked at or are you considering the impact that the actual construction of it?
So that would be a consumption, well, so construction emissions are part of, do show up in the inventory. But we don't look at that specifically from a policy standpoint yet. As we go forward and as we identify strategies, we will certainly be looking at construction emissions as part of, as a lever to potentially pull to achieve our emissions reduction goals. And again, this is a consumption-based inventory, a fuel consumption-based inventory. It's not a consumption-based inventory based on the products and the life cycle of those products at this stage. That's an area that some jurisdictions are starting to move towards. It's a much more complicated approach to an inventory. We're looking at that, but we have not done that at this stage.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the process you went through to kind of look at other forms and try to customize it for Oahu. I'm at Kapiolani Community College, and we're getting a VISTA this year to do a greenhouse gas inventory at Kapiolani. And I'm hoping that your VISTA will help our VISTA figure out how to customize this to a campus. Because I lead a national community college alliance for sustainability education. There's thousands of 1,200 community colleges that are trying to figure out what their greenhouse gas inventories are. So I really hope we can collaborate in that way.
Look forward to working with you. You know, as I said, this is a community scale inventory. We are absolutely looking at doing an operational inventory, which would be more akin to, I think, what you're looking at doing. We have a lot of that data already, so we kind of have, we know what we're looking at. I think waste and some land use is really the tricky part in doing an operational inventory, because it requires, measuring. There's a little bit more measuring as opposed to estimating that you can do.
Yeah,
if you want
this
to
will
do.
all happen in my office, so I'm really eager to develop this system.
What's important to note is, an inventory, it's a set of principles and accounting. It's an accounting and standards, protocol, right? Where you're using, processes to develop an estimate.
Right.
And we have an estimate, and there's a degree of uncertainty in that estimate, and over time, I hope it'll get narrower and narrower as we go.
Great.
So, do you have a takeaway strategy from this? What are you going to do with the inventory? Is it
So we're
feeding to an approach?
Yeah, so we're going into phases 2 and 3 from that chart, which are target setting and identifying strategies. And we've actually broken it down into building emissions and transportation in 2 different areas. And we have various procurements right now that we're looking at to hire on a consultant that will help us do each of those areas. And we'll sort of be overseeing it from a combined standpoint. But we are actively bringing on resources to, one, create targets to align with the state's targets, but also to identify the strategies we're going to use, whether it's a policy, whether it's a project like like energy efficiency measures on our own plant, or some combination thereof. We're going to look at try to find a portfolio of measures to achieve these goals that we set. So we're in that process right now.
And is there like a point at which you will have decided this is our strategy forward? Will there be some sort of public report or announcement or?
Yes. So we'll have a climate action plan.
So that's the climate action plan.
So the climate action plan will be a combination of the inventory with targets that we've set, and then sort of a punch list of strategies and policies and tactics that we're going to use to achieve those targets, all written up in a very nice narrative. We're looking to release that sometime next year. That's our time frame right now.
Is there an equivalent effort on the state side?
That's a good question. I don't think there's a climate action plan.
You guys are it.
I don't think there's a climate action plan process. They've done the inventory. Dr. Bernstein's doing the forecasting along with Dr. Kaufman and others. But the plan is wrapping it all into together and tying it together. Pathway forward. So we're absolutely going to be doing that, and look forward to working with many of the partners in this room.
Okay.
Last question, Jim. Can you think of some way that the commission can help you at this stage?
this stage, you know, I think, you know, review our inventory, and if you guys see any issues with it, let us know. But going forward, it's going to be about helping us to validate, you know, some of the decisions that, you know, some of the strategies that we're looking at, and the science and the numbers behind those decisions that we're making, just to ensure that, you know, we're, you know, making our decisions based on valid assumptions and science and logic.
Great, thank you.
I think this next presentation actually gets into that a bit.
Yes.
Thank you, Rocky.
All right, so Josh mentioned, along with, we're updating our energy and electrical codes. The electrical codes, and this is a huge strategy and tactic for achieving our carbon emissions and climate goals. It's, you know, when we, you know, when the office looked at like impact and what we could do, energy codes came up as like, energy and electrical codes came up as like the most foundational and impactful thing we can do right off the bat. And of course, Hawaii, we've been behind on our energy and electrical codes. The last energy code to go through was 2006, the IECC 2006. The last electric code was 2008, so we're catching up. In fact, you know, the IECC, a lot of the carbon emissions reductions that are embedded in codes happened between 2006 and 2015. So what we know is that what we've seen is basically adoption of the energy code from 2006 to 2015 will mean that a building will be 33% more energy efficient going forward. That's sort of the main number. This shows, you know, where we are in terms of the code. There's the residential code over on the left. We're in the second percentile in terms of advancement on the code. So again, we're catching up. We're in the fourth percentile. In other words, 96% of jurisdictions are ahead of where we are in terms of code adoption. What else? One of the big things in the energy code, thank you Howard Wigg at DBED in the State Energy Office for really championing what's called the Tropical Code, Tropical Zone Code. And what that is, essentially it's an alternate pathway for builders where they can select to build towards a tropical code. And this is things like, you know, allowing for, you know, less air conditioning, 50% or less air conditioned, rough-ins for ceiling fans, you know, 3-foot eaves, and just, you know, commonsensical, you know, building approaches that are actually lower cost, that make more sense here in Hawaii than in, you know, a place like Buffalo, New York, or Seattle, Washington, or something like that. These are sort of commonsensical, sort of the Dickey houses of the past. You know, it makes sense to use this. This is really relevant for us and for Southern Florida. And again, Howard Wigg at the State Energy Office was really influential in pushing this at the national level. What happens is there's an international code, which is kind of a model code that's adopted on the continent at the International Energy Conservation Council. The state Building Code Council then adopts that code, and we have essentially 2 years at the county level to adopt our own code. And what you do is you either adopt the code as is, or you adopt with local amendments. And what we're doing, the tropical zone is in the international code. We've also added a couple local amendments which we wanted to bring to the attention of the commission.
And Mr. Wigg did come and present to us last year. So.
Great, so, right. He's much more eloquent on the subject than me. So I'll move along. Sorry, there's a little bit of the order. Okay, so one of the big local amendments is a solar water heating provision. And what we're doing here is we're recommending that a state law that mandates solar water heating for new residential construction gets pulled down into county codes. And we're actually removing an exemption for gas in those codes unless it's renewable. So what we're saying is for all new construction going forward, if, you know, install solar hot water or any renewable source hot water system. In over 15 years, if it doesn't pay out over 15 years, then we offer exemptions. There are a couple other exemptions in terms of a heat pump and a grid interactive water heater, but again, we pulled gas out of this. We looked at the numbers, and really, the resilience strategy is about long-term affordability for residents, as well as carbon emissions in the environment. And on an all-in basis, if you look at the numbers, solar hot water, given the abundant solar resource we have here in Oahu, really is the most affordable and clean, carbon-free solution, and it's really about residents, right, and making it low cost for residents. And we did some numbers, and we reached out to stakeholders across the board, and a wide variety of stakeholders, including potential opponents. And we asked them, we showed them what our numbers were, what our assumptions were for the economics and the carbon impact of these various solutions. And so across the board, across the top of this slide, you'll see solar hot water for a bulk solution, so that's 100 over 100 installations. And then you'll see a single family installation of solar hot water. And then instantaneous gas heating, again, which we're pulling out, not allowing for as an exemption, unless it's a renewable source of gas. A heat pump and grid interactive, and this just shows sort of some of the economics, of our assumptions. And then you'll notice, solar hot water's payback, is really high. It's a simple payback of 3 to 4 years, usually 3 to 6 years, depending on what your assumptions are. The heat pump is a really good solution, a really good new solution, but there's less of a track record of it right now. We may look at that in the future as something more viable. Again, we showed these numbers to a large array of stakeholders and listened to them, and we changed these based on the input that we received when it was valid. We took a look at the numbers and we adjusted them. This just, I know you can't read this, this just shows this is what we provided in terms of a listing of the assumptions that we used and the sources that we used for the information. We tried to use all neutral, publicly available, third-party sources of information for our data. This just shows a little bit of what was going on there. The second substantive local amendment is electric vehicle readiness. We're saying that for all new construction for residential homes, that you need to have a rough-in for a level 1 charging, plug. Essentially, a normal plug has to go to your garage. We're mandating that now. For multifamily, for large multifamily, and for commercial, we're employing EV readiness at level 1 and level 2. So what we're saying is 25% of all new stalls for multifamily should be level 1 ready, and 25% of all new stalls for commercial should be level 2 ready. Of course, so this is just a little description of the definition between the differences between EV capable and EV ready, and level 1 and level 2. It just basically says, level 1 is a simple trickle charge, normal 110 volt plug, whereas level 2 is a 208. It's like your dryer or your washing machine plug. We realize that this isn't free. EV readiness is going to cause some costs, extra cost on the installation, but over time, relative to a retrofit scenario, it's significant savings. And what we're trying to get is, right now, a lot of estimates are coming in from the private sector that EVs are going to be at parity with internal combustion cars by about 2023 or so. And when that time comes, we just want to be sure that new construction going in isn't going to have to come back and retrofit at 10 times the cost of a new build scenario. So again, we went out to stakeholders and gauged information, and for EV ready spaces, a retrofit scenario ends up being about 6 to 8 to 10 times more than a new build scenario. And then this is just a little bit on the electrical codes. One of the barriers to our renewable energy policies, in particularly in getting batteries and PV plus storage systems, was the electrical codes weren't clear on how you treat batteries. So the electrical codes is really key in clearing up some of the language around that, so installers and HECO can go out and approve PV and storage systems. So that's a brief rundown of what we're doing in electrical and energy codes. Thank you very much for your time.
Do you wanna also present?
Yeah, so we can bring, yeah, so can you pull up the, do you have that? So this is a testimony that we recommend for you all to take a look at. This is your testimony. Please feel free to let us know. We provided this to you all beforehand. Have a look at it. But this is a letter of support for our energy codes. Bill 25, 2019 is before the council right now. It will be heard by full council on June 5th at the 10 a.m. full council hearing, and most likely it will be referred to the Zoning and Housing Committee, we believe, which is on June 20th for committee hearing. And we're asking folks to get involved and be involved in this process, and we've been talking with stakeholders about this and letting them know that if they want their voices heard, it's happening.
So I reviewed this in advance and I'm comfortable with this language. I wasn't sure if, because we were able to have a conversation about this at the full commission meeting, if we sort of all sign on to this, and this is probably a question to win, and how that would work. But anyways, I am very comfortable with this language in the testimony. Okay, so let's.
You guys.
We've not done this before, how do we sort of make a motion to approve this language? Can we put everybody's names on this, or just as the commission, or is it just, how does that work?
We put everyone's name on the letterhead motions, but it will be signed by the Climate Change Commission.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, it will be signed by you on behalf of the Climate Change Commission, and you can have everyone's name on it.
Okay, that sounds good. Alright, so can I get a motion to approve the testimony as written?
I move to approve the testimony.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, please stay,
Yeah.
just move you down.
Okay. Thanks.
We have other questions, and you're right here. Alright,
Thanks for coming.
There were two testimonies.
Yeah, one is to Lenore and one is to.
right, but they're identical languages for just two different committees, correct?
It is only yours. You guys are.
Yes. Okay. Let me put that on that. Okay, go ahead, Maria.
Aloha, and thank you for letting me speak today. As I mentioned earlier from my seat, I thought the City Climate Commission is sort of where it's at in the cutting edge issues going on, so thank you. I was gonna break my talk into 3 parts. One, give a little bit of background to Life Land. Second, talk about our methodology. And talk about the market solutions such as the carbon tax. So Life Land was founded by 15 women. We didn't have a man on our original board. In 1995, the Star Bulletin ran a 3-part series reviewing the history of Hawaii since statehood, and said if you look at the period from 65 to 75, and pick out the 10 people or organizations that made Hawaii what it is today, they came out with 6 individuals and then Bishop Estate, Land Use Commissions, Life of the Land, and labor unions. So, one example was prior to the freshman class entering at the law school, and prior to the state having an EIS law, one summer, 80 law students applied to work at Life of the Land. 19 were accepted and joined 14 lawyers on staff. So we had a tremendous impact at the beginning of the environmental movement in Hawaii. And that included winning the 1971 HECO rate case before the Supreme Court. I joined the organization in '94. My partner, Kat, joined in '95. And we took on climate change in '99. In 2006, we had the opportunity to cross the line with HECO in an evidentiary hearing in which we asked a number of HECO witnesses about climate change. And they said things like, it's not my kuleana, aren't there two sides of the issue, and those kind of things. And the following month, in January of 2007, the HECO Board of Directors adopted a resolution saying that climate change is real. The regulatory proceedings before the PUC. And in the Huhonua one, which was just decided May 10th by the Supreme Court, we had oral arguments last fall, and the state took the position in the oral arguments that renewable energy and climate change are the same thing. You do one, you're doing the other. And they had to be pointed out by the Supreme Court justices that that's not true. There is no reference to climate change or greenhouse gases in any of the renewable energy statutes. For analytical methods, we tend to be extremely data-driven, extremely evidence-driven, seeking credibility, looking at assumptions, looking at boundary conditions, looking at logical flows and emissions, because when we're handed a report, one common thing in this Twitter era is to open it up and see what Twitter has pronounced about the study. Whereas we assume that any study that we're looking at is false until we find out otherwise. And the closer it is to our position, the greater the need to challenge it because of the confirmation bias, because people tend to believe what they hear. So for example, we asked Hawaiian Electric a few years ago an example about the goal of 2045 of 100% renewable energy in 2045. And they gave the example of if the grid is 35% renewable, 65% fossil fuel, and there's an equivalent of 80 units of rooftop solar, then the renewable portfolio standard is 115%. The grid is 35% renewable, and we would have exceeded the 2045 goal. And yet, one of the most common myths that we hear all the time is we're going to be 100% renewable in 2045, which is simply not true. And as scientists, we probably all know that the universe is made out of energy matter, which can't be created, it can't be destroyed, and therefore it's not renewable. Therefore, renewable energy is purely a political definition. And Hawaii has had 5 radically different definitions in the past 2 decades. A little over 10 years ago, ethanol companies proposed setting up giant production facilities on Kauai and on Maui. And the state legislature decided to change the law on how you define biofuels, biomass, to say that no matter how they're produced, they're always green, they're always renewable. Chop down the Amazon rainforest, fly it to Finland, break them up into wood chips, fly them to Oahu, burn them, and it's renewable energy. So the idea that we can't get to 100% renewable energy using an RPS standard is crazy. The other thing that we find is that since Kyoto Protocol, the West has been outsourcing greenhouse gas industries, buying the goods back, and blaming the Chinese for having high emission levels, which that won't solve it. We need a scientific solution, not a political solution. So there have been sort of three waves of how industry has reacted. The first wave was Exxon, starting in 1977 in the early 80s, when they came out and they hired some great scientists. They came to the conclusion that climate change is real. They predicted parts of 400 to 420 parts in the atmosphere in 2020. They got it almost right. And they began hardening their system to prepare for what was coming and to give themselves a leg up in the market, because if their systems are hard and other people's aren't, they will come out ahead. And at the same time, they began smearing science and scientists. So that was sort of the first wave. And you see that even today, where companies are buying out large parts of Africa because they think agriculture will move into that area with the coming disaster in the existing belts for agriculture. So they're buying up large parts of Africa to capitalize on the coming climate change, which is considered disaster capitalism, where you seek not to do anything about it today, but you seek to profit from it. And the second wave is cap and trade, which is really the hallmark of Kyoto Protocol. You say that get rid of government, get rid of the people, have the polluters trade credits among themselves, don't monitor them, and somehow miraculously everything will get better. And I love James Hansen's testimony before the U.S. Ways and Means Committee in 2009, pointing out all the things that went wrong with it and how obviously it was a bogus solution. So industry came back with a third approach, the carbon tax. And I want to liken it a moment to the general excise tax. We have a general excise tax, which is 4.5% at the local level. But because of pyramiding, it's another 4 to 10% that's hidden, that's embedded in the price. So when you buy a good, you don't know if it's really at 8% or 14% because it's all hidden. But part of it up front is available. The carbon tax is totally hidden. You have no idea when you go in how much carbon tax you're paying. So you're trusting corporations, you're trusting polluters to reduce their use of nasty greenhouse gas releasing stuff. But you as an individual can't have any determination if you're buying something that's really bad or really good for the environment. So the special report on global warming, the SR-15 that came out recently that said we need to have a 50% cut in emissions in 1 decade, said that a good starting point is $115 carbon tax, using 2010 dollars. So that would be 155 today. No country in the world has 155 today. The closest is Sweden, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. They're all above 100. But nobody else comes close. The New York Times reported that the average rate among OECD nations is $8 a ton, which is hardly something that will change behavior, especially when the IMF came out and said that the subsidy to fossil fuel industry is trillions of dollars. So you can't send one signal giving trillions of dollars away and another signal saying, oh, by the way, there's an $8 fee attached. And it's not like a cop pulls you over, catches you polluting. You say, I'm sorry. You pay a fee, and you say, I won't do it again. Rather, the carbon tax is you don't admit guilt, you don't say you will stop it, and you pass the fee on to consumers, which is not exactly a winning strategy for reducing emissions. So I've been looking around the world to try to figure out, has anybody done it? And the ACEEE, let's see what they stand for, Energy Efficiency, the International Energy Efficiency Entity, analyzed 16 nations, 4 in Scandinavia, 6 in the rest of Europe, 2 in Asia Pacific, 4 in the Americas, 16 countries, plus Boulder, plus British Columbia, and plus Quebec. And they found the average reduction per year due to carbon tax is 1.3%. Now, if you
Reduction in what, emissions?
reduction in emissions that they can attribute to a carbon tax
With very low tax rates.
with very low tax rates. Now, as we pointed out with the yellow vests, you have a high tax rate and you give it to, you may have a high regressive tax and it backfires. So the proposal in the Wall Street Journal, which I love because they say, we need a carbon tax and we need Republicans, well, I'm sorry, we need a carbon tax. We need to get rid of the pesky environmentalists. And they say, let's give all of the money back. If you look at SR 15, which called for a carbon tax, and in the very same paragraph, and in the next paragraph said, a carbon tax is necessary but not sufficient. That you need a number of different programs attached, and the carbon tax is actually the smallest component. Some people, economists, have said that the solution, that is the most efficient way of doing things. But I tell you, a ban is more efficient. Saying that we will not use fossil fuels after 2030 and we're gonna phase them out rapidly, that would get a reduction much quicker. But economically, the idea is, why not a carbon tax? And one of the places that is highlighted is British Columbia. British Columbia started a downward trend in greenhouse gas emissions in regulated industries in 2004. In 2008, they implemented a carbon tax during the global meltdown. And lo and behold, greenhouse gas emissions dropped. And all the studies that include that 2008 time period show a drop. But if you start looking from 2009 beyond, the story is very different. 2 things pop out. One, the tax sector had emissions growing at a faster rate than the non-tax sector, which is bizarre. Second, it does not apply to electricity because British Columbia's electricity is almost all hydroelectric. And third, British Columbia's forests are very different than other people's forests. Most forests are carbon sinks. British Columbia's forests release more greenhouse gases than all other sectors combined. And British Columbia defines forests to be carbon neutral. In fact, something like 3/4 of all the renewable energy in Europe is burning wood from Canada and the southeast United States. And burning wood is defined as carbon neutral. Under the Kyoto Protocol, it was decided without any evidence, without any data, that if you grow a tree and chop it down and burn it, it's carbon neutral. And there's currently a lawsuit in the EU by a private group which is challenging that assumption. But that assumption is rampant throughout the world, that if you chop down the world's carbon sinks and burn it, it's neutral. So a carbon tax is, you impose a carbon tax, let's say you do it, and then how do you give it back? One idea at the national level is you tie it together with citizenship. That way you identify who's supposed to be in the country and who's not supposed to be in the country, and you give the refund only to the people who are citizens. You pointed out, people drive in from Waianae, and it's hotter in Waianae, and people drive long distances on the Big Island. There's been no analysis that I've seen that is Hawaii-specific about what the impact of a carbon tax would be here. Rather, it's taking national models, moving them to Hawaii, making a bunch of assumptions, not peer reviewing them, not opening them up for review, and saying, don't worry, on average, the lower quintile will do better than the upper quintile. But that uses an enormous number of assumptions, and I haven't seen anybody say, and I will put my money behind it. So, that's my view.
Thanks, Henry.
The one other thing I want to say, and this is important, carbon tax is transparent in that the government will tell you the total amount of money they raised. It's not transparent in how much each individual pays. And the UN Sustainability Development Goal number 12 calls for responsible production, responsible consumption. As Rocky pointed out, and as we've argued before the Public Utilities Commission, it should be a consumption-based method. When you go to a gas station, wouldn't it be nice if in addition to the price, it said how many embedded greenhouse gas emissions per gallon was available for each type of fuel? That's not that complicated to figure out. Hawaii Gas, how much greenhouse gases are associated with that? So when you compare oil and gas, you're not just comparing price, but you're comparing emissions. Transparency, accountability is key. Getting consumers to be able to make responsible decisions is key. Problem with both the cap and trade and the carbon tax is you're assuming that corporations will make the right choices. And you're giving breaks to those who have polluted in the past through grandfathering their actions.
Thank you, Henry. Are there questions from the commission?
I've got one.
Well, hold on, your commission first, then we'll go to the other one. Go ahead.
Haven't we instigated a ban? We are going to be fossil fuel by 2045?
No.
Fossil fuel free?
We're gonna be an RPS of 100% by 2045.
But not actually.
But not,
And your first example of how they calculated that
Yes.
was your explanation of how that's not really what we're
right. So we're not gonna be 100% renewable energy. We're not tying it to greenhouse gases. And the thing up there when they were talking about domestic transportation versus international. If somebody flies to Hawaii on vacation and flies home, our numbers count only one-way flight.
So I have a follow-up to that, so I think this is an important point, right? So I think you make a number of great points, Henry. So this issue of the RPS, right? The rules around the RPS that basically double count behind the meter solar, which comes up with the numbers that you said. And there's been many years trying to fix that at the state level, and it's yet to be fixed, right? I also think you make a really good point about consumption-based inventories, and that was made earlier. And this issue that sort of biofuels are carbon neutral when we know they're not, right? And that is a policy issue, an interpreting issue, not a science issue, right? But what I take from Chip's question though, is to me, there are a number of tools on the table and they can all be manipulated,
Yes.
right? So bans can be manipulated as well, because in theory, that's what the RPS is. It's a form of ban,
Right.
And that's been manipulated as well by double counting solar, right? So there's these tools on the table and they're not perfect because they get politically interpreted.
Right, and therefore having as much of it in the public arena where it can be analyzed, and having government being monitoring and verifying is really key.
Right. You know, I mean, I take your point about cap and trade systems really failing, right? And my frustration with sort of looking at the systems that have failed, it's these tweaks to them that have made them fail, right? It's having safety valves on the prices. It's not allowing sort of the allowances to freely trade. There's all these ways in which the policy is undermined in the market. That's mainly why we see the emissions trading scheme basically trading at such low levels that it's nearly meaningless, right? So anyways, I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that many of these policies can be good and bad,
Yes.
depending on how they're implementing.
Yes.
So I do have a question though. Your conversation around labeling, and that's what I interpreted, sort of
Yes.
this issue of like, can people see this and understand what they're consuming? I think that's really interesting. And do you have examples of places that have labeled for carbon?
There are places that are trying it. A number of cities on the West Coast have begun looking at it. The issue was first brought up in 2008 in a study. So it's newer than the production method. But it's really looking at, nobody has implemented it fully. But we have suggested taking the big ticket items like the imported fuels, which are easier to analyze than looking at a house for all the embedded stuff in it, or a car. But take the first steps on things that are easier to do.
Because, I don't know, in my mind, crafting a policy around embedded carbon emissions is a bit, it's important yet unwieldy, right? But maybe a complementary aspect would be to have sort of consumer information to that front. I'm not sure, anyways.
Well, part of the problem is if you're a mainland state, you would tend to get a lot more from the local market. Islands tend to have high amounts of imports. So we have far greater embedded emissions than most other places. And in fact, one example is, and I'm not sure where the cement was used for the rail line, but cement is the third leading greenhouse gas emitter in the world. And the state greenhouse gas 2015 report noted that Portland cement went down to 0 in 2015 because we exported the industry. Now, I don't know if that was the cement used for the rail line, but if it was, then the entire cement for the rail line counts as 0 carbon emissions. In addition, when you dig a hole to hold a turbine up, you normally put 69 cement trucks full of cement into each turbine to hold it in place, of cement and concrete. It's a huge amount. It can offset 1% of the 1 year's worth of reductions in the savings due to the wind farm, but that is not looked at.
I'm not arguing that that's a problem. I agree with you, it is. But the counter to that is we also don't import or export electricity, right? So to Rocky's point about stage, the first and second are collapsed in terms of stage 1 and stage 2. So magnitude-wise, I'm not sure what's.
But interestingly enough, North America tends to use far more fracking than other parts of the world. And if you add up the individual emissions from each of the wells, and then you compare the atmospheric area in the basins above the wells, you find that there's a large amount of unaccounted for emissions. So the gas company likes to say, and HECO to some extent gets their oil, but not much from fracked wells. The gas company likes to say, you can't tell because it's all mingled together. But they get it from a set of pipelines in a very small, not the major section of the gas grid, but a small section that can be isolated. You can also use accounting methods. You simply say, somebody will add in a certain amount of gas that they've calculated the embedded emissions from. You remove something at the other end. You're not molecule by molecule reducing it, but the accounting method is, they're putting this in, you're taking it out, you're accounting for it. And therefore you can figure out what the emissions are for your fuels coming in.
And I would agree that gas and biofuels are sort of the end of the spectrums on being very off in terms of out-of-stack emissions and
Yes.
on-cycle emissions. I know there was many questions in the room, so.
Yeah, Henry, I'm sure you must be aware.
Can you introduce yourself for the record, sorry?
I'm sorry?
Can you please introduce yourself for the
Tom
record?
Brandt. You know, Governor Inslee in Washington State tried to do a carbon tax and dividend. They shot it down. Jerry Brown was thinking about it in California. I read a lot about it. Some very high-profile pre-Trump Republicans were endorsing carbon tax and dividend a few years ago. But I agree, if you don't reduce the billions in fossil fuel subsidies, it's like urinating in the wind to try to do this stuff. But, assuming that could ever be done, at least level the playing field between renewables and fossil fuels, and factor in energy return on energy invested, which I don't think it's considered a lot. I mean, you know more than I do about that. But I think it still has potential, especially if you could put on the gas pump, make it aware so the consumer knows at the retail level, every dime I'm paying in taxes, how much of their per gallon cost in taxes is coming back into my pocket. The irony of a tax and dividend thing, if it really works, eventually the tax revenue dribbles down, right? And the dividend that comes back to the consumer will, but by that time, that's the purpose of it anyway, right? But people get hooked on it, like the Alaska Permanent Fund. If you try to fiddle with their Alaska Permanent Fund based on oil revenue that goes to each citizen, they scream bloody murder, so that's a problem we don't have to worry about yet, but someday for that. But were you aware of the state level?
Well, first, Washington State was interesting because they had two initiatives separated by 2 years, and the first one had large environmental opposition, the second one had large environmental support, and they both went down in flames.
And what's your explanation for that?
It's, again, who gets the money, how it's allocated. Traditionally, the way it is you introduce the tax at a low rate, you give it back to consumers, then a couple of years down the road, the legislature reallocates the funds.
Yeah.
So in British Columbia, it all went back, a large part went back to residences, and then it began shifting.
Then the politicians took it back, right?
And the problem in France is it was a tax not even to support the people giving it in, but rather it was a high tax with no social justice benefits. So you can't use the carbon tax to screw economically challenged people as a win-win solution. Because
it's like a
you need
bribe
a solution that unites people rather than one that splits people apart.
I'm Jadine Suki. I'm with Hawaii Gas, and I'd like to just straighten the record about some of the attributions Mr. Curtis has raised about the gas company. We have historically made our natural gas, syngas, out of oil products. Over time, we transitioned from heavy oil to the light ends of the refinery, which is naphtha. And most of the gas that we produce for our utility consumption is produced locally. It does not come from fracked resources as is attributed. We had started production of renewable natural gas in partnership with the city and county in 2018, and that is starting to produce another local renewable supply of natural gas, which we think has great promise for the state, because it's taking waste methane and making that into a renewable energy source, which we see. I don't know what your breakouts are for wastewater or just landfill gas, but that seems to be growing, and as population grows, you're going to need to do something about that waste methane, and we have a way to solve it, and we'd like to do more. But I disagree with some of the statements that you made, Mr. Curtis, because not all fossil fuels are the same. Natural gas as an energy resource is the lowest carbon intensity of fossil fuels if managed correctly, and we have to report all of our emissions that come out of the SNG production, and according to the latest reports to EIA, and that these can be verified publicly, our SNG plant is attributed at 1/3 of 1% of greenhouse controlled, that doesn't do anything to reduce carbon emissions. It doesn't do anything to help the state and city achieve the Paris climate goals. It actually adds 5 times the emissions of a instant gas water heater. And so I just, have some strong disagreements about, one, how gas energy is being attributed locally, because most of the production historically has been of repurposing local waste resources that would tend to be flared if we weren't using them to make natural gas.
So I would say yes, reuse of potential flared gas from wastewater or treatment facilities is a real plus. Sand Island is the next one that really has to be converted. I would also point out that the Supreme Court has one more climate case that they're hearing, and that is Life-of-Land's appeal of the PUC decision in the gas company rate case.
So I have a question. I noted in the report that solid wastewater emissions have increased. It's one of the numbers. It's increased like 4,000. How does that tie into the reuse of this energy towards, to turn it into natural gas?
Yeah, so, converting the methane that is produced from, the wastewater treatment process is something we're definitely looking at. That assumption, so what we've done it's really an accounting and like estimating method. And because of a sort of a lack of data on our part, for that, we actually grew that at a population growth figure. So the reason you see the
So it's an
growth,
estimate.
is estimated.
Got
Yeah,
it,
it's an
okay.
estimate. Yeah, so there's an uncertainty with that estimate. And like areas like wastewater and wastewater treatment, there's more of an uncertainty there. As we, look to our resources to harness them, like we're doing with one of Uli Uli, we'll have more insight into those, and we're gonna definitely look at how we can improve our methodologies for our inventory going forward.
Yeah, this is a simpler point, but when I made to Chip the last time he was on campus, and it refers to sort of the labeling part of the discussion. It used to be car commercials would tell you the highway and town miles per gallon. That never happens anymore. So we've stopped putting that information in front of consumers. And it's just an example of the kind of how we've lost the sort of communication battle here, that we no longer even put that information in front of people. It seems to me that's a pretty simple thing that this commission could recommend, would be the car dealers and car advertisers tell us the town and highway miles per gallon. And then because right now consumers aren't being confronted with that decision at all. You can buy this, if you see an ad with miles per gallon, town and highway, send me an email, but I bet you won't. But it's just an example of how the communication system has been overrun, and we're losing ground on this.
I have no idea the status of this, but I do remember some years ago there was a lot of conversation at the state energy office in regards to having very local specific labeling for car purchases. I don't know what happened to that.
I think if you did that and then added this extra piece of the gas station, you'd begin to change people's sort of assumptions about the things they're buying.
Hi, Jeff Burgett. Just a question about how did you arrive at the 25% EV ready or EV capable parking spot? Why not 50%? Why not 100%?
So it was a compromise, and we went out to stakeholders, and the numbers that we formed were based on stakeholder outreach. So Vancouver has a 100% EV ready mandate they pushed. So we didn't want to come on too heavy too fast. So we wanted a compromise solution. And so we figured for a 12, the limits are 12 spaces for a commercial. So that means 4 spaces, right? 3 spaces, and then 8 spaces for multifamily. That means 2 spaces. I don't know. It was reaching out to stakeholders and coming up with a number.
Just
That
like
was a compromise.
Just like 2045, you might ask how that came about. There were a crowd that wanted 2040 and a crowd that wanted 2050. It was a compromise.
And we hope that this will be a minimum standard and that you know, owners who are building new, you know, parking facilities will eventually, you know, see this as an opportunity, but for, you know, helping out their customers and their residents, is something that they will want, because EVs will be,
Well,
the car of the future.
Sorry, I just felt it was kind of limiting the potential market, because I have an EV and.
You want
it's hard
more,
to find-
yeah.
Yeah.
We've heard that, we've heard more, wanting more and then not wanting it at all, so it's sort of a compromise solution,
Chair Kaufman, are we taking questions on everything or just on Mr. Curtis's? I mean,
we
public
should-
testimony on
We
on
should
Mr. Curtis's?
primarily focus on Mr. Curtis right now.
Okay.
And then next we can open it up to broad questions, although we're also running out of time, so we're gonna have to.
Right, and
stop
there were no
shortly.
questions, no public testimony allowed for items on the agenda, right?
Oh,
It's
sorry if
only
I missed
public
you 'cause you're behind me.
No, there was nothing asked, even before the testimony, the folks voted on the testimony, there was no transparency, ability for members of the public to comment on that, because of information that.
No, we've been
only
taking
public-
testimony along the entire time, or comments along the entire time.
Okay, but, okay, we can look at the record, but there was no, do we have any comments from the public?
So I've always been
That's
taking.
next, it's number 10.
Oh, no, no,
Yeah,
no,
those
but-
are only on items not on the agenda.
No, but I've been taking comments from the commission, so comments and questions from the commission, and then I've taken comments and questions from the public for every agenda item. I'm sorry if I missed your hand before.
Oh, no, but, okay, I mean,
We
I
were
think the
hunting
record
together
reflects
most of our
that there was no opening.
No, that's not.
Post their agenda quickly or as required by the statute, does it have, you want to submit testimony
Yes, but it also allows oral testimony, so I'm well familiar with the sunshine law. Having been the corporation counsel for city and county for 8 years, so I'm well aware of this. And, just a little disappointed that after every agenda item, there wasn't a call, like there's the state land use commission for everything else. Other commissions, they allow public testimony right after the item.
That is what I've been doing.
I think,
Okay, well-
I think you were opening it for questions, but potentially not testimony to be totally, to be
exactly.
completely exact, so I see his point.
Okay.
So
Would you
I
like to
think-
give it
yeah.
now?
No, after, as your agenda goes through,
Yeah.
I'll testify during the,
I think in the future, we just need to be more specific about not only questions, but perhaps
But
testimony
comments
as well.
Yeah.
All of this is considered testimony. It's all on
I,
it.
Yes.
I was actually looking for the opening to just comment on Bill 25, but you kind of moved quickly into number 9, so
Yeah.
I think that's
a fair point.
Okay.
yeah, we can look at the tape. There was no opportunity for the public. We'll look at the tape. right?
I think that's fair. I think
Okay.
those comments are fair.
No, I think next time to know, maybe we'll write it more explicitly in the agenda, but it's after every agenda item, there's an opportunity to take comments.
Thank you.
Justin, did you have something about the process?
Just perhaps for complete transparency, I agree, probably moved pretty quickly. Perhaps the commission could reconsider its vote on the testimony that they adopted.
Oh, yes,
and
let's
allow
do that.
testimony from the public before you
Oh,
and
shucks,
revote on it.
Josh, you just deleted the grounds for.
That's Justin. But no, I think that's fair, because if there is specific testimony in regards to Bill 25, then I think we should hear that before we
Yeah,
vote.
let's do
So
that.
let's do that now. I think
Okay,
this
but
is.
finish with Mr. Curtis.
That's okay for the interruption.
So to keep time, or not take up much time, I'm curious, does the public have a chance to respond to Mr. Curtis's number 9? I don't wanna go in a back and forth of he said, she said. And I'm wondering, I have a number of disagreements with what was said. And I'm wondering how one can put something into the record to state that.
I think you can probably state it now, if you could state it somewhat succinctly. And Justin, is there also an opportunity to take written testimony ex post, to put it part of the record?
Commission can always take written testimony, and if the commission requests to add any testimony that's submitted in writing to the minutes to this, we can certainly accommodate that.
Okay, so why don't you make your points, your main points now?
I think that'll be more effective. But basically, I think the carbon tax has just been completely mischaracterized. People respond to prices. We see that all the time. you're saying people don't respond at all to prices by saying that if you put a price onto the consumer, that's a poor way to get them to act. Changing prices is a great way to get people to change their behavior. We see that all the time. It's a great way to have producers change their behavior. They will move, if you put out lower cost, more energy efficient goods, that's the way producers will behave. Consumers demand more energy efficient goods, demand electric vehicles, producers will eventually make those vehicles. I think prices we see are very effective. I think we all go to the market, we react to prices. Everybody pulls out the Long's ads, they pull out the other ads on Sunday, they react to the prices. So anyways, I just think that's a complete mischaracterization. Also think you're confusing carbon, a cap and trade with a carbon tax when you're talking about grandfathering. There is no grandfathering in a carbon tax. You just apply it. So I think there are a lot of just mischaracterizations, and I'll just leave it at that.
And I'll just have two very brief responses to that. One, different sectors of the economy have different elasticities. The relative movement due to a price change, that varies greatly by sector. And second, what was your second?
Grandfathering.
Your grandfather.
Oh, grandfather. No carbon tax that I'm aware of anywhere in the world has been applied to everybody. There's always been certain industries that have been removed from the carbon tax. It is applied to something like 60%.
Okay, but that's your assumption. That's not what we're calling for when we say a broad-based carbon tax. When you're saying a carbon tax doesn't work, you're making an assumption about how you want to apply it. If you want to apply a carbon tax across all goods and services, there's no grandfather.
I was looking at the Wall Street Journal article in the 3,500 economists.
Right, which is calling for a broad-based carbon tax on everything, not just on 60% or 40%.
Everything.
You're definitely going to enter in written.
Yes, I will.
Okay,
I will.
I'll appreciate looking into that.
Yeah. And I will also follow up with something in writing.
Let's go back.
All right, thank you.
I'll try to be very quick. Dave Arca on behalf of the state land, on behalf of the Land Use Research Foundation. And we're testifying in opposition to Bill 25, or proposed Bill 25. And we have four main areas, and I'll try to make this quick. But the first area is the EV charging requirement, mandate the 25% EV charger-ready parking stalls. We have 8 comments on that. I'll go through them quickly. That the 25% was arbitrary. The stakeholders that actually build shopping centers and the stakeholders that actually build housing projects did not agree to 25%. So while they may have talked to us, there's no way in the world that we would agree to 25%. In fact, that bill failed at the legislature this session. It was Senate Bill 1000, and it failed at the legislature, asking for, it originally started at 20%, and they dropped out the number, and it eventually failed in conference committee. Second, the requirement is illogical because it mandates old technology, which could be out of date in a few years due to new technology changes, which reduce the need for EV charging stations. Those include battery charging improvements for cars, wireless EV charging, wireless inductive, just drive-by charging roadways, solid-state batteries. I talked about another innovative EV battery technology. And we would say that the passage of this bill would be like the 1920s mandate that developers provide one ice box and a block of ice for each food item, each parking stall, when they could, in the future, technology will say, you can have a refrigerator, you can store all your items in there, right? You know. Third, that we need to examine the future need for charging stations. I know there's testimony that by 2023, that the number of gas-powered cars would equal the number of electric vehicles, but we need to look at other issues like ride-sharing, car rentals, autonomous driverless vehicles, electric bicycles, Honolulu Rail project. All those issues need to be factored in. Number 4, it adds cost of up to $11,300 for each EV charging parking stall, and that's on the record. That's on the record, and that wasn't presented to you folks. at all. If it was, I didn't hear it, okay? And so for affordable housing and for provision of housing, that's gonna be an issue. It'll increase the cost of living in Hawaii. It will negatively impact housing prices in communities and for commercial tenant lease rents. So the cost of goods and services will also go up. Number 5, instead of mandates that impose substantial costs on housing for communities and private commercial tenants, Hawaii should follow the example of California and New York and provide millions of dollars to build thousands of public charging stations and inductive charging roads and that kind of technology. So put their money where their mouth is, rather than the government should put their money where their mouth is with respect to electric charging vehicles and charging stations, rather than impose that on people who buy new homes and people who shop at shopping centers. I'll reduce it to, well, number 6, the proposed implementation date was unreasonable because it will require changes in permits that are already ongoing. And as many people know, when you propose a project, you get financing, and the financing depends on what you're gonna put in there. So this would cause a change in the financing for major projects. The proposed solution, one of the proposed solutions, we would say, number 7, is for this committee and the resiliency working group, to the city's resiliency working group and the Office of Sustainability, to look into rebates and other incentives for EV charger-ready parking stalls and how to put them in state facilities and county facilities, to look at that, to increase it. And number 8, and I guess I already talked about it, create a working group to prepare, and this is where, amazing that I agree with Mr. Curtis but to prepare a reliable study, with unbiased study with data relating to EV charging stations, and for that working group to make recommendations to that resiliency group and to you folks. So those are the 8 things on that. This item 2 would be the restriction on air conditioning to not more than half of the area of a dwelling unit, to 50% of the dwelling unit. We have issues with that. Can you imagine if DOE said, or the state said, you know what, we're gonna air condition 1/2 of a classroom that kids sit in all day? That's, I would say, it raises a health and safety issue, right? It raises a huge health and safety. 50% of classrooms, are you kidding me? You know, we get laughed out of the legislature, but anyway, that's another story. Number 3, the third issue that we wanted to talk about is the proposed restrictions on gas water heaters. That 90% restriction, Rocky went out with an expert from, Rocky Mold went out with an expert from the gas company, and they looked at solar installations, and they found that even the solar installations weren't getting 90% efficiency. So if there's gonna be a standard, make sure everybody meets the same standard. That's the first thing on the 90%. The second thing is that standard is unreasonable to put in effect right now. I think that would be a goal that the gas company and gas water heaters should strive for. That 90% run by renewable energy sources. I think that should be a goal. But imposing it at this time just is akin to a prohibition. You might as well just say ban it, right? So I'm just gonna do a couple of handouts. One handout is the definition of renewable energy, and I know there was talk about the definition of renewable energy, and the definition under HRS is on this back page, and there are 9, and I know people have talked about this at this meeting, but there are 9 sources of renewable energy, 9 renewable energy sources, right? And of those 9, 4 relate to gas. 4 relate to gas that could power gas water heaters. So by putting a 90% requirement, you're knocking out biogas, you would knock out biomass, you would knock out biofuels, knock out hydrogen. Knock out 4 of these things listed on the back page. These are all recognized by the state as renewable energy sources. So you're knocking them out. You just say, there's no way in the world that can happen in the next 2 years. Okay, and we would argue that to meet whatever is required by 2045, you know? And we agree again, you know, but, to meet whatever is required by 2045, we need to make use of all of these alternative energy, renewable energy sources, not floor out, right? So, there was talk about the Honouliuli wastewater treatment plant. I'm agreeing with Mr. Curtis all the time, but there was testimony about capturing the methane from that and using that to create renewable natural gas. And the efforts of the gas company and the city to look at Honouliuli wastewater treatment and also Wananalo Gulch, right, the methane produced by the dump. And if this passes, there goes all that R&D, there goes that research, because there's no way they could use it. You just prohibited by a 90% requirement, you just prohibited the use of gas water heaters. So there's not gonna be that market. So anyway, we would ask that you take a look at that, and the cost of a gas water heater, $2,900. These are the latest estimates as of last week. $2,900 for 80-gallon solar water heater system, $7,800 for a 120 solar water heater system, $8,800. It's important to know, so it's more than twice the amount for an affordable housing unit for people on a budget. It will cost. Get this, even more important, the warranty on these gas water heaters are 20 years to 25 years. Warranty, 20 to 25 years. Okay, that's the warranty. For solar water heaters, 13, 15, you're gonna have to buy 2 gas water heaters at this price, right? At this price. So if you have to buy your second solar water heater, it could cost you $15,000, $600 within 30 years, right? Within 30 years, right? Within 20-something, 25 years. Whereas you'd only have to buy 1 gas water heater, on-demand water heater for $2,900, okay? And there's the cost for a 120 solar water heater system, $17,600, but you're gonna have to buy 2 in the span of 25 years, because the warranty doesn't last that long, right? And I guess the issue on that is it's gonna increase the cost. There are annual maintenance costs. So with the annual maintenance cost, that number goes even higher. Every year you gotta do your annual maintenance for your solar water heater. The 5th issue is every year they're increasing solar water heater tank requirements. Expansion tanks, seismic strapping, bollard and wheel stops. So that's an additional cost that solar water heaters are gonna have to have, that gas water heaters don't. A major issue is efficiency. Number 6, the major issue is efficiency. Gas water heaters are more efficient than solar water heaters. And as I said, the expert from Hawaii Gas went out with Rocky Mold. They looked at solar installations that were put in on this island, and they found that the solar water heaters were sorely lacking. They didn't meet the 90% efficiency, right? And so that's something that needs to be looked into. Also, efficiency issue number 7, gas water heaters are more efficient because they only heat the water when you need it. They only heat the water when you need it. Solar gas water heaters keep it heated even if you don't need it. And when it's nighttime or when the sun's not out, you have to use electricity, burn oil to keep the water. Okay, the 8th issue is.
Can you provide all these comments
Yeah.
in written form after we're done?
Sure. And 8 is, we can prove with data, and that's why I like Mr. Curtis, we can prove with data that a suite of gas appliances, if you use gas water heating, gas stove, gas dryer, is way more efficient and saves way more energy than if you use a solar water heater and you use electricity for everything else. Way more efficient and way more savings, lower carbon footprint on that if you use a suite. 8, 9. Okay, when you look at resiliency, issue number 9, during the storms, people could heat their water for sanitation purposes on the Big Island and on Kauai if they had a gas water heater, when they had a gas water heater. In fact, Hawaiian Gas was called to both Kauai and to Hawaii Island during those emergencies to heat water. And you know what? If you guys kill this or make it illegal, that's not happening. The prison had a
To be clear,
issue.
we don't have that authority, but yes.
Well, if you support Bill 25, it will kill the use of solar water heaters. If you require 90% of it to be, right now, today, to be renewable energy source gas, right? You know, we're not there yet. They're not there yet. Okay,
Can you wrap up?
okay, I'll wrap up.
Mr. Eric.
All right, we're just saying alternatives are necessary to drive competition, for renewable energy. And the solar, rooftop solar takes up real estate, or takes up roof space for, possible PV. LURF supports, solar water heaters. Our members put in solar water heaters before it became law. Before it was a requirement under law, our developers put in solar water heaters. Some of our developers put in solar water heaters on 100% of their homes that they built. The last issue, I guess the fourth issue, is mandatory ceiling fans for the whole house. And again, we have issues with that. We believe choice is important on that. And I guess that is tied to also the requirement for air conditioning, or the limitation of 50% of your house being air conditioned. The last comment I'm gonna make is for your consideration, and I don't know, it's probably not gonna be here. Oh, you are a deputy corporation counsel.
yeah.
Ah, you weren't there when I was, okay. But anyway, also, anyway, I'll leave that. Anyway, so this is, we took a look at, we were wondering about this commission, and you folks are all very qualified commissioners. We were wondering why the certain industries are not, and interests are not represented on this, both this commission and on the Resilient Strategy Steering Committee, right? Tourism is not represented, agriculture is not represented, housing is not represented, large landowners are not represented. So that's our comment, and those two comments, add members to the city's Resilient Strategy Steering Committee. That comment is on a matter that's not on the agenda, you know?
And we can pass
item.
that along to
And
the
then-
city office.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the thing about adding members to the Climate Change Commission is also not on the agenda, but we thought we'd raise that, and it would allow for more broad input, and some of the issues I brought up, we wouldn't have to testify. We have somebody on the commission that would know that kind of thing. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
We have a 45-second comment on this.
Yes, and then there was another one.
She wanted to, but,
Yes. Yes.
The brief comment, solar water heaters are able to absorb excess electricity from the grid and to provide support for the grid. So demand response is the new concept, where solar water heaters actually help to stabilize the electric grid and decrease the need for additional generation or controls on the grid side. That is the one thing that gas can't do that electric can.
I just have a question, just for clarification. When you spoke up last time and then you mentioned it, I just wanted to be clear. I heard, and I wanted to be clear, that you mentioned possibly there's a ban being considered to ban gas appliances. Is that what you were saying, or is that, did I mishear that?
I don't think I did say it's a ban, but it's in effect, I think,
But you're
somebody might
speaking
have said-
specifically to solar appliances, not necessarily to other
speaking
appliances.
to hot water.
Sorry, gas appliances,
Yeah.
sorry, not, sorry, did I say solar? There's a ban being considered to ban gas appliances, is that what you said?
Ban being considered in this bill to
Just
ban
for
gas,
this,
water.
just
Water
for water
heaters.
heaters, okay, no, I just was wondering if you meant all appliances, but you were meaning water heaters specifically, okay, thank you.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'm curious this discrepancy between what Mr. Arakawa said in terms of the cost of the EV-ready stalls and what Rocky presented on the cost of the EV-ready stalls. I mean, the order of magnitude is different by about 10 $12,000.
No,
so-
in the table that I noted down, it was about $10,245 for between 5 and, sorry, I have like a kind of like really good photographic memory. As I recall from the table, he actually did present a table and there were two different numbers. One was for a lower, it was like 5 to 10 stalls, and then it was greater than, and the 5 to, or
It was a
5
retrofit scenario versus a new build scenario.
This is what I wanted to
So,
clarify.
yes.
So and how do these numbers line up and what?
Ours was a new bill. Our
Yeah.
numbers were new bill.
Now, is that with the charger as well?
No.
Yeah, yeah, that's a discrepancy in numbers, for sure, so, I'd like to see where those numbers come from. Yeah. We got these numbers from EV Ready House.
So they're kind of diverging into matters that are, we're having substantial conversation on matters that are not on the agenda. So I think if you want to continue this conversation, we should have another meeting, list it as an agenda item so that.
But this has to
Bill,
do with
Bill
the-
twenty-five
this
is on the agenda.
But this
EV
also-
ready
yeah.
stalls are one of the major 4 issues.
Our testimony.
Our testimony is.
Yeah, the testimony is supportive.
And it was part of his presentation, so we're actually.
So, and I apologize I did not catch this earlier, but Bill 25 itself was not called out on the agenda item.
It was.
It is.
Yes.
No, it is.
Sorry, where is it? I don't know.
Number 8.
When you put the agenda on the,
Item number 8.
Okay. The testimony or the signed testimony, the letter to the committees that Rocky submitted, was that made public before?
Good point. It wasn't.
The copies are.
Copy's right here.
Was it in the agenda?
Because what the agenda item says is discussion/action by the county change commission on bill 25.
Isn't the action to submit testimony?
It just says discussion/action.
But it's not clear enough to have a member of the public say, oh, they're gonna discuss testimony, I better come.
Oh,
So-
okay, I agree.
So I didn't catch that, but, you did vote on submitting the testimony to committee. I would suggest, you would need to either, change the agenda by 2/3 of the vote, and then vote on submitting the, testimony, or.
I don't think that's accurate technically, and I would agree with Alan, that technically. David, sorry,
That's okay.
David. So I technically, I think that should have been part of the agenda, the bill itself, the letter itself.
That, I agree with that.
If the commission had heard, presentation by Mr. Mold and then decided to come up with, testimony here in the meeting, would that have been accepted?
Are you asking?
Probably.
It's
Sorry,
not,
what?
but it's not on the agenda.
So, yeah, so. I
Because the
think-
intent of that agenda item per Chair Kaufman was to consider testimony in an open forum and then to approve or reject a testimony.
However, the draft of that testimony wasn't provided along with it.
I think you could vote to support the bill without a letter, but the fact that you have a letter that you're submitting, that's the problem.
Yep.
I would.
Because.
It says action there.
Right, but so you could vote to support the bill, but you can't vote to support a letter that's not publicly available.
Correct.
The letter is supporting the bill.
Yeah,
No.
and the letter is from the commission. You don't involve the public in drafting a letter of testimony.
You're just
from the
creating another
commission.
issue for appeal.
Huh?
You're just creating another issue for appeal. Mr. Curtis is correct. You guys could vote to support the bill,
Yep.
but not with
I
the
agree, that's
testimony.
right. So,
How many meetings have people been here where commissions have submitted testimony and they haven't put the testimony to the public to comment on and to make changes on? That's why we have a commission.
No, that's the sunshine law.
We want to go into.
The sunshine law is so we discuss the item.
We left the
I think if
council.
we want to go into further details on this, I would strongly recommend going into executive session where that, because it's to discuss the privileges, the duties and liabilities of the committee. So we can go into executive session for that, I want to do so.
But normally, don't you have to have executive session listed on the agenda?
The commission can go into executive session by 2/3 vote. I want to, table that action and then take it again properly as a properly listed agenda item at a later point in time.
Okay, so my suggestion is to follow that because action was not specific enough, that we, and there's obviously more conversation to be had, particularly with the discrepancies in numbers and things that we want to shine more light on. Why don't we have another commission meeting solely on this topic and do it soon?
That has to be before.
Actually, very soon.
Yeah,
Do we have enough time before the fifth?
The first introduction and assignment to the committee is June 5. After that, there'll be 2 or 3 more months before it goes for final approval.
Right.
There also will be a public hearing, probably in July, right? At the next full council meeting, July full council meeting, right? There'll be a public hearing.
And we have the option of submitting personal testimony, so I recommend that we, table this with the future meeting then, if we're gonna do public testimony as a commission. But we can still submit personal testimony on June fifth.
Do
Yeah,
you
and then I'd
all
like to,
feel comfortable?
yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Okay. Okay. We will adhere to that advice, and move forward.
The motion for this entered into the record, is to, reach back to commission's vote on the testimony.
Okay.
And then which would be discussed and voted on.
Alright, so motion to, retract the vote around the testimony for Bill 25, to be discussed at a later commission meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, I know Christina really needs to go.
I'm so late.
Yeah, you're so
I
late.
apologize.
And,
I have to be somewhere else.
yes, and we'll still have quorum, so we're fine. Okay, yeah, okay.
I wanted to, yeah, we're gonna go through that.
Well, we do need to get through public inputs for matters not on the agenda. And for Kirsten Hutter.
Okay, the main point we already did, but I also just wanted to ask or suggest, maybe it's not in a way that you have a criteria for cost accounting. So whether you're doing full cost accounting or whatever, and making the comparisons of the numbers, so that there's a criteria against which you're making your decisions, and that will clear the air for a lot of these differences in opinions as to what is more efficient as to, price cost, because you're taking into quality of life and other issues and things like that.
Good point. Thank you. Are there other public inputs that are?
So Jadid Suki again with Hawaii Gas. I agree, with Kristen's suggestion about trying to understand what the validation points are for the different assumptions. We've actually been working with Rocky to provide some inputs because some of the assumptions that were being utilized for basing some of the data are using national assumptions on water usage and water temps, starting water temps. And as someone earlier mentioned, in Hawaii, we don't have that much variation. I think it was Rocky in ambient temperature. So we actually have a warmer water temperature to start, and so basically extrapolating some of the data, the federal data that is available, makes a disparate assumption to begin with for what our emissions or even costs are for heating water. Also, Hawaii, has the highest energy utility costs of any sector, so that needs to be factored in, and some of the data that has been used historically has not been updated, even with the state data, trying to pull what the latest PUC, what the tariffs, what the latest rates are, so that needs to be also factored in. There's some other assumptions that are being put into place, like that solar water heaters produce energy have a 90% efficiency factor rating. And if you look at the map of where the solar water heating variances are granted for gas, about 70% of them fall in a not optimal solar radiation map. So you can't argue that, for one, those solar water heater devices are producing 90% of their energy from the sun. The other thing is that the PUC has some guidelines on how these solar water heaters should be installed, and not everybody's following the same guidance. Some of the units that we walk to they're not sized properly. They're oversized for the homes, and they because they're oversized, they produce more water than is needed, and the parts inside those units degrade much faster, and that adds to the overall cost of home ownership, because you have to replace your solar water heater sooner than you expect, or you're pulling from the grid, and that's adding to your overall operations cost. So basically the assumption, if those assumptions are going to be made, then they should be enforced. If the 90% renewable requirement, which is premature at this moment, is to be put in place, then the same standard should be all of the other appliances should be held to the same standard. The other thing that we found about the solar water heaters is that not all the homes are perfectly oriented to the best exposure of where the solar penetration should occur. So not all homes have south-facing roof lines. We have roads that are with cul-de-sacs, that are intersections, and the roof lines are not all oriented the same way. The street grids are not oriented the same way, and so for the installations are not oriented the most optimal way. So making assumptions based upon something that is just basically stated is not a fair way of creating public policy that has such a wide effect on imposing very high upfront costs on the homeowner. The other thing that should be considered is that the state standard, the state has a solar water heating mandate that has new guidance in place, and that I think we would recommend following, because having all of these other factors in place I think it would create more limiting areas to how you build new residential homes, how you treat Ohana units, for example. I mean, the first cost and the 30-year mortgage or whatever term period you're amortizing over, that's going to bear a significant cost and become more of a barrier to affordable housing in this island. And I think we all well know that balancing affordability and also meeting the terms of the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement need to be, those are priorities. So if you're starting to introduce old technology as a way of addressing those needs, I think that that's going the wrong direction. And banning gas water heaters which have a high efficiency rating, which also have a very high warranty lifespan, which is beyond the 15 years that is one of the assumptions for under Bill 25 for residential water heating is a disservice to, homeowners, to future homeowners in the county. Thank you.
Okay, is there input for an item on the agenda?
Good evening, Commissioners. It's getting to that hour. Justin Groenstein, Deputy Director, Office of Climate Change, Community Resiliency. Just wanted to state for the record, in response to some of the testimony given here by Mr. Arakawa and Ms. Suki, that we can certainly agree to disagree on some of the policies, and I think as this commission goes forward and considers whether you support this bill, in particular Bill 25 or any other, that it's really important that the transparency be there. We have shared all of our assumptions, all of our data, all of our information, and done everything we can from our office to have validated information to compare the numbers. I think, unfortunately, we have not received the same data, although it was promised by particularly Hawaii Gas. So it's impossible to verify the numbers that we're getting. It would be good if we could get those numbers, and the commission could get them as well, so that we can verify the information that's being purported from both sides. Again, you saw in the presentation by Mr. Mold, all of the data, all the assumptions, all of the third-party verifications of the information that we've used. Not to say that it's all perfect. We've made a number of corrections. We've made a number of changes along the way, in part by input from stakeholders such as Hawaii Gas and LERF. And the other thing I want to add, just to respond, that there's a number of issues, but I'll just leave it at this. With regard to the 25% EV readiness mandate, it is indeed true that LERF, Mr. Arakawa, would never agree to that, to the point that we have reiterated numerous times that was a compromise. We've heard for some folks that have raised the question alluding to why wasn't it higher? Why wasn't it 100%? And there's others that would like to have 0. And so the 25% was the compromise. We did not at any time say that all the stakeholders or any stakeholder agreed to the 25%. There are some that were really far advocating on one side, ones that were advocating on the other. The 25% was a compromise. So I just wanted to state that for the record. Thank you, Commissioners.
We're on item 10, right?
Yes.
Yeah, regarding the EV charging station issue, Mr. Arakawa pointed out, it is a fact that technologies that use the road surface itself to recharge vehicles with kinetic energy and or solar energy running along the roadsides are both, at least in the conceptual phase or experimental phase. When they will be tech feasible and cost efficient, right, ready for prime time, I don't know if anybody knows that, but that's a valid point. That might make build out or what's the other word up there?
Retrofit.
Yeah. Of EV stations, stationary ones. Yeah, they might, like our fossil fuel power plants, right? I can't remember the term. They're bought and paid for, so we have to use them until they pay back the investment, right? You might get the same thing on a smaller scale, but I've also heard, I think people are working on mobile on-demand EV charging stations that come to you, right? Rather than the other way around. I don't know how they work or how ready they are, but it's just a thought I wanted to throw out there if there was no awareness of that. And finally for today, kind of tangentially related, Peter Savio is a local, I call him the local Robin Hood realtor, because he's made a career out of trying to help low-income people become homeowners instead of renters, right? He, about 3 years ago, I'm not sure what triggered this, but it got a lot of local media coverage. He was proposing this idea that we're missing an opportunity to tax or impose a fee on landowners adjacent to rail to help pay for rail. He thought, it came up, I brought it up again with Mayor Caldwell's most recent proposed tax increases to pay for the most recent cost overruns, right? And I don't know what happened to it. Hawaii News Now did a lead story on it like 3 years ago, and it just came and went off the radar screen. But David Callies at the UH Law School said, yeah, this is feasible. You can defend it legally. It's not unconstitutional. It's just a matter of political will, which takes widespread public awareness first, and then widespread, consistent public demand for it. So, and the money you could raise from that, Salvio was as far, you could rebate what rail has already cost us to the taxpayers. Now, that sounds like pie in the sky, but he thinks that's feasible and legally possible. It's just a matter of politics, right? So,
Thank you.
Just one last clarification. We do support the portions of Bill 25 that would implement changes to the IECC, the International Energy Code, and also the State Energy Code. So we do support all of those. It's just the local amendments we'd like to work further with the city. And in fact, we're working with the state DBED on similar issues. But the city doesn't know we're working with. This is the first time I'm revealing it. But these are issues of such great importance that, and statewide, because every county is gonna be trying to do what you folks are doing with the energy code. So 2 weeks ago, we started talking to DBED about working with them, and we just talked about working together.
That's great, thank you.
Great, thank
Sorry.
you.
And can you please submit some of
Sure.
what you wrote, cause
Yeah,
that would be good
please
to have those
submit
points.
everything.
Sure. It's all in my testimony to the state on the 2 things. So I'll put it into one package for you folks.
Okay.
Sources in there too. You get sources every day.
Alright.
Except for the last one.
We're getting to item
The last one is,
11, tentative next meeting date. I suggest we do this by email.
Yes, sounds good.
And announcements. Announcements. Hearing none, then I think you can conclude the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Doesn't go for you.